Paris, January 7th, 1962. 17 plastic bombs explode across the city in a single night. One of the targets, a small apartment on Rue Bonaparte. The blast tears through the entrance. Shrapnel scatters across the street. Upstairs, an elderly woman narrowly escapes death. This was the second time in 6 months that terrorists had tried to kill the man who lived there. His crime? He wrote philosophy. Jean-Paul Sartre was the most dangerous intellectual in Europe. The Catholic Church banned every word he ever wrote, threatening believers with excommunication if they read his books. Right-wing paramilitaries bombed his home twice and marched through Paris chanting "Send Sartre to the firing squad." The French government considered prosecuting him for treason, but Sartre did not write about overthrowing governments or building weapons. He wrote about freedom, and that made him more dangerous than any army. He claimed that humans have no fixed nature, that God does not exist, and that you are condemned to be free whether you want it or not. He said there are no excuses for your choices, no one to blame for what you become, no escape from the weight of responsibility. These ideas terrified people in power because they stripped away every justification for obedience. If Sartre was right, then no one had to follow orders. No tradition was sacred. No authority was legitimate. Every person could choose to rebel. Jean-Paul Sartre was born in Paris on June 21st, 1905, into a world that would soon tear itself apart. His father, a naval officer, died of fever when Jean-Paul was only 2 years old. This absence would shape everything. The boy grew up in the home of his maternal grandfather, Charles Schweitzer, a language teacher who filled the apartment with books and the kind of intellectual atmosphere that turns children into philosophers. The young Sartre was not a beautiful child. He developed a condition called strabismus, a severe squint in his right eye that left him partially blind on that side. Other children mocked him. He learned early that the world judges by appearance, and he learned to fight back with words and ideas. He attended the École Normale Supérieure, the elite training ground for French intellectuals. There, in 1929, he took the aggregation examination in philosophy. He placed first. A woman named Simone de Beauvoir placed second. They met. They talked. They began a relationship that would last 51 years and redefine what partnership could mean. Sartre and Beauvoir never married. They never lived together. They maintained what they called a necessary love between them, while allowing contingent loves with others. This arrangement scandalized conventional society and fascinated everyone else. They shared everything intellectually but refused the cage of traditional domesticity. They were inventing a new way to be human together. In the 1930s, Sartre taught philosophy at various lycées around France. He was, by all accounts, an unconventional teacher. He took students to cafes. He discussed films and jazz alongside Husserl and Heidegger. He spent a year in Berlin studying phenomenology, the philosophy of consciousness and experience. This German philosophy would provide the foundation for everything he would build. Then came the war. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, Sartre was mobilized. He served as a meteorologist in the French army, a job that left him plenty of time to read and write. He filled notebook after notebook with philosophical reflections. When France fell in 1940, Sartre was captured and spent 9 months as a prisoner of war. He was released in 1941, having convinced the Germans he was partially blind and unfit for labor. Back in occupied Paris, Sartre joined a resistance group called Socialisme et Liberté. The group was small and frankly ineffective. It dissolved within a year. But the experience of occupation, of living under an oppressive regime, crystallized something in Sartre's thinking. Freedom was not abstract. It was the fundamental human condition, exercised even in chains. During the occupation, Sartre wrote and wrote. He completed his massive philosophical work, Being and Nothingness, in 1943. He wrote his first major play, The Flies, a retelling of the Oresteia myth that French audiences understood as a call to resist. He wrote No Exit, the play that would make him famous worldwide. All of this while Paris was under Nazi control. When Paris was liberated in 1944, Sartre was already a known figure. After the war, he became something else entirely, a celebrity intellectual. He gave a famous lecture in 1945 called Existentialism is a Humanism that packed the hall so full that women fainted in the heat. People came to blows trying to get seats. Existentialism became a movement, a fashion, a way of life. Sartre and Beauvoir made their headquarters at the Café de Flore in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. Every day, Sartre would arrive in the morning and write for hours, drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes. He wrote everything in cafes, surrounded by noise and people. He needed the chaos. The solitude of a private study felt like death to him. He wrote novels, plays, essays, philosophy. He founded a journal called Les Temps Modernes that became the voice of the post-war intellectual left. He was everywhere, commenting on everything. He became the conscience of France, or at least one version of it. In the 1950s, Sartre moved closer to Marxism. He tried to reconcile existentialism with communist thought, a project that satisfied almost no one. The communists thought him too individualist. The anti-communists thought him a dupe. He traveled to the Soviet Union and wrote embarrassingly positive things about what he saw. Later, he would regret this. His relationship with Albert Camus, once a close friend, exploded in 1952 over politics. Camus had written The Rebel, which criticized revolutionary violence. Sartre's journal published a devastating review. The two men never spoke again. It was a very public break, and it hurt them both. Sartre opposed the French war in Algeria with fierce consistency. He supported Algerian independence when such a position could get you killed. There were plastic explosive attacks on his apartment. He continued anyway. For Sartre, the intellectual had a duty to engage, to take sides, to act in history. In 1964, Sartre was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. He refused it. He said he always declined official honors and that a writer should not allow himself to be turned into an institution. The Swedish Academy gave it to him anyway, saying the prize could not be declined. Sartre never showed up to collect it and never accepted the money. The late 1960s brought the student uprisings. In May 1968, Paris erupted in protests. Sartre, now in his 60s, supported the students. He spoke at the Sorbonne. He was arrested for civil disobedience, then immediately released when the police realized who they had. President de Gaulle reportedly said, "You do not arrest Voltaire." His eyesight deteriorated through the 1970s. The blind eye from childhood worsened, and the good eye began to fail. By the end of his life, he could barely see. He continued to work, dictating to assistants. He remained politically active, supporting various causes, some more coherent than others. Simone de Beauvoir cared for him as his health declined. They had never married, never cohabited, but she was there. On April 15, 1980, Jean-Paul Sartre died of a lung edema. 50,000 people followed his funeral procession through Paris. It was one of the largest public funerals France had ever seen. He left behind a body of work that changed philosophy, literature, and political thought. He left behind a way of thinking about human freedom that still shapes how we understand ourselves. He was not always right. He made mistakes, some of them serious. But he lived according to his own principles. He believed that existence precedes essence, that we create ourselves through our choices, and he chose again and again to engage with the world as he found it. Existence precedes essence, the revolutionary idea. Traditional philosophy, for most of human history, worked from a simple assumption. Things have essences. A knife has the essence of cutting. A chair has the essence of being sat upon. These essences come first, and the actual objects we encounter are merely instances of these prior forms. This is what Plato taught, and in various forms it dominated Western thought for 2,000 years. This thinking extended to human beings. We have a human nature, an essence that defines what we are before we make any choices. We are rational animals, or children of God, or naturally social creatures. First comes the definition, the blueprint, then comes the individual person, built according to that plan. Sartre rejected this completely. For human beings, and only for human beings, existence precedes essence. We are thrown into the world with no predefined nature, no instruction manual, no purpose given from above. We simply exist, and only afterward do we create what we are through our choices and actions. The claim sounds abstract, but its implications are radical. Consider what it means. There is no human nature that determines how you should live. There is no cosmic purpose you are meant to fulfill. There is no essential self hiding inside you, waiting to be discovered. You are not a knife that must cut, or a chair that must support weight. You exist first, as a bare fact. You find yourself here, conscious, in this world. What you make of that existence is entirely up to you. You create your essence through living. You define yourself by what you do. This represents a complete reversal of traditional metaphysics. For Plato, the form of the good exists eternally, and good actions are good because they participate in that form. For Aristotle, humans have a telos, an end or purpose built into their nature, and ethics means fulfilling that natural purpose. For Christians, God created humans with a specific nature and purpose in mind. Sartre says no. There is no form of the good existing independently. There is no built-in purpose. There is no God who created you with a plan. Even if God existed, it would make no difference to human freedom. You would still have to choose how to respond to that existence. The comparison to manufactured objects makes this clearer. When a craftsman makes a paper knife, the idea of the paper knife comes first. The craftsman has a conception in mind, a blade to cut paper. The essence precedes the existence. The knife is made to fulfill that predetermined purpose. But no craftsman designed humans. We were not made according to a blueprint. We appeared in the universe through biological processes that had no intentions, no purposes, no plans. We simply are. We exist. What we make of that existence comes after. This means radical freedom. You are not constrained by a predetermined nature. You can become almost anything. The coward can become brave. The believer can become an atheist. The worker can become an artist. Nothing in your essence stops you because you have no essence yet. You are creating it now with every choice. But this freedom is terrifying. It would be comforting to say, I am a coward by nature, or I was born to be a teacher, or my personality is just naturally anxious. These statements shift responsibility away from yourself. They suggest that your essence came first and determines your existence. Sartre says this is bad faith, a form of self-deception. You are using a false claim about human nature to escape your freedom. You are treating yourself as a thing with a fixed essence rather than as a human being who creates meaning through choice. The student who comes to Sartre asking whether he should join the resistance or stay home to care for his sick mother receives no answer. Sartre refuses to tell him what to do. No moral system can decide for you. No essence of being a good son or a patriotic citizen settles the matter. You must choose, and in choosing, you define what it means to be a good son or a patriot. Your choice creates the meaning, not the other way around. This reversal changes ethics completely. There are no moral facts existing independently in the universe. There is no natural law written into the fabric of reality. Morality does not consist of discovering what is already true. It consists of creating values through commitment and action. When you choose to help someone, you are not recognizing a pre-existing moral fact that helping is good. You are creating the value of helping through your choice. You are saying through your action that this matters. The value comes into existence through your commitment to it. This does not mean morality is arbitrary or that anything goes. When you choose for all humanity. You are saying through your action, this is how a human being should act in this situation. You are creating a value and proposing it to the world. This creates enormous responsibility. The reversal applies to personal identity as well. There is no true self waiting to be discovered through therapy or meditation or self-help books. You are not on a journey to find who you really are. You are creating who you are through your choices. The self is not found, it is made. This has political implications. Systems that claim to be based on human nature are suspect. There is no natural social hierarchy. There is no predetermined role for women or men or any group. Claims about what is natural for humans are usually attempts to justify existing power structures by pretending they reflect eternal essences rather than historical choices. Existence preceding essence means history is open. The future is not determined by our nature. We can create new ways of being human. We can invent new values. We can build societies that have never existed. Nothing in our essence prevents this. But it also means there is no guarantee of progress. We can choose badly. We can create ourselves as cruel or cowardly or conformist. Freedom does not ensure good outcomes. It only ensures that the outcomes are ours. This is why Sartre called existentialism a humanism. It places human beings at the center, not as the pinnacle of a great chain of being, but as the sole source of meaning in an indifferent universe. We make ourselves, we create values, we give life purpose. Nothing else will do it for us. The idea remains shocking. It strips away the comfort of saying, this is just how I am, or that is against human nature. It forces you to take responsibility for what you have become and what you will become. It offers freedom but no excuses. Radical freedom, the burden and the gift. Sartre's conception of freedom is not about political liberty or the absence of external constraints. It is more fundamental. Freedom is the structure of human consciousness itself. You cannot escape it. Even when you are in chains, even when every option seems terrible, you remain free because you must still choose how to respond to your situation. This sounds paradoxical. How can a prisoner be free? How can someone facing a gun have freedom? Sartre's answer is that freedom is not about the range of options available. It is about the necessity of taking a stance toward whatever situation you find yourself in. Consider a prisoner in a cell. He cannot leave. His movements are restricted. From a political perspective, he is unfree. But he still must decide how to respond to his imprisonment. He can try to escape or accept his fate. He can resist psychologically or collaborate with his captors. He can maintain his dignity or abandon it. He must choose what his imprisonment means. Even the decision to give up is a choice. Even despair is chosen. You can always choose suicide, which is the ultimate refusal of the situation. The fact that you continue to exist means you are choosing to continue. You are taking a stance. This is what Sartre means when he says we are condemned to be free. You did not choose to be born. You did not choose to be thrown into this particular situation, but you must choose what to make of it. There is no escaping this responsibility. The source of this radical freedom lies in the nature of consciousness. Human consciousness, for Sartre, is characterized by what he calls nothingness. Consciousness is not a thing. It is a lack, a gap, a distance from the world. It is the ability to stand back from what is and imagine what is not. When you are conscious of a tree, you are not identical with the tree. There is a separation, a gap between your consciousness and the object. This gap is nothingness. It is the space of freedom. Because you are not identical with the world, you can question it, negate it, imagine it differently. This nothingness means you are never simply what you are. A stone is what it is, fully and completely. It has no distance from itself. But a human being is always at a distance from themselves. You are always more than your current state. You can always question whether you should continue being what you are. A waiter is performing the role of waiter, but he is not identical with that role. He can step back and ask whether he should continue being a waiter. He can imagine other possibilities. The stone cannot imagine being anything other than a stone. The human being cannot avoid imagining otherwise. This capacity for negation is freedom. You can say no to what is. You can refuse the role assigned to you. You can imagine a different future. This is not a special ability that some people have and others lack. It is the structure of human consciousness as such. Freedom in this sense is not something you achieve. It is something you are. You do not become free by removing obstacles. You are free in the very act of encountering obstacles and deciding how to respond to them. This has strange implications. The slave is free in the same fundamental sense as the master. Both must choose their stance toward the situation of slavery. The slave can choose resistance or accommodation, rebellion or acceptance. These are different choices with different consequences, but both involve freedom. This does not mean slavery is acceptable. Sartre is not denying the evil of oppression. He is pointing out that oppression works by limiting options, not by destroying freedom as such. The oppressor cannot reach into your consciousness and eliminate your freedom. He can only make certain choices more costly. The political goal should be to expand the range of meaningful options available to people. But expanding options does not create freedom. It allows freedom to express itself more fully. The freedom is already there, in the very structure of human existence. This radical freedom creates anguish. When you recognize that you are fully responsible for your choices, that nothing determines them, that you could always choose otherwise, a kind of vertigo sets in. There is no ground beneath you, no essence to fall back on, no nature that tells you what to do. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff. You feel vertigo, not just because you might fall, but because you recognize that you could jump. Nothing stops you. Your freedom confronts you. You must choose not to jump, and that choice is yours alone. Most people flee from this anguish. They pretend they are not free. They say, I had no choice, or my nature made me do it, or the situation forced my hand. These are forms of bad faith, ways of denying the freedom that defines human existence. But the freedom remains. You can deny it, but you cannot eliminate it. Even the denial is a free choice. Even the decision to live in bad faith is made freely. Freedom also means that you create your own values. There is no value that constrains your freedom from outside. You cannot appeal to God or nature or reason to tell you what you must do. These appeals are themselves choices. You choose to recognize God's authority or nature's directives or reason's commands. This makes ethics terrifying. When you choose without certainty, without guarantee, without any assurance that you are right. You must choose, and you must take responsibility for the choice, but nothing tells you definitively what the right choice is. The gift of freedom is possibility. You are not stuck being what you have been. You can change. You can create yourself differently. The past does not determine the future. Your essence does not constrain your choices because you have no essence until you create it. This means hope is always possible. The person who has lived badly can choose to live well. The coward can choose courage. The liar can choose honesty. Nothing in their past makes these choices impossible. But the burden of freedom is responsibility. You cannot blame your genes, your upbringing, your society, your circumstances. You chose how to respond to all of these. You are what you have made yourself through your choices, and this responsibility extends beyond yourself. When you choose, you are proposing a value to all humanity. You are saying, this is how one should act. Your choice is a statement about what human beings can and should be. This creates enormous weight. Sartre gives the example of a student during World War II who must choose between joining the Free French forces or staying home to care for his mother. Either choice is justifiable. Either choice creates a value. But the student cannot escape choosing. Refusing to choose is itself a choice. He is condemned to be free. The radical nature of this freedom challenges all determinism. Psychological determinism says your choices are determined by your unconscious drives. Social determinism says your choices are determined by your economic position or cultural background. Biological determinism says your choices are determined by your genes. Sartre rejects all of these. Your unconscious, your social position, your biology create a situation, but they do not determine your response to that situation. You always have a margin of freedom, a gap where choice operates. This gap is consciousness itself. Even under torture, freedom remains. The person being tortured must choose whether to resist or confess. The choice may be constrained by unbearable pain, but it remains a choice. The torturer is trying to eliminate that margin of freedom, to reduce the person to a thing that simply responds to stimuli. But as long as consciousness remains, freedom remains. This is not meant to glorify suffering or excuse torture. It is meant to recognize the indestructible core of human freedom that exists even in the worst circumstances. The oppressor can never fully succeed in eliminating it. Freedom, for Sartre, is not a pleasant doctrine. It offers no comfort, no certainty, no refuge from responsibility. It says you are alone, without excuses, facing choices that you must make without guarantee. But it also says that you are the source of meaning, the creator of values, the author of your own existence. This is the human condition, and there is no escape from it. Bad faith, how we lie to ourselves. Bad faith is Sartre's term for the fundamental dishonesty of human existence. It is the attempt to escape freedom by pretending you are not free. It is lying to yourself, but a special kind of lying where the liar and the one lied to are the same person. This creates a peculiar structure that ordinary lying does not have. When you lie to someone else, you know the truth and conceal it. The structure is simple, but when you lie to yourself, you must somehow both know the truth and hide it from yourself simultaneously. You must be both deceiver and deceived. This seems impossible, yet people manage it constantly. Bad faith takes many forms, but they all involve treating yourself as a thing with a fixed nature rather than as a free consciousness. You pretend that your essence precedes your existence. You claim that something in your nature, your past, or your situation determines what you must do. Sartre gives the famous example of the waiter in the cafe. Watch him work. His movements are a bit too precise, too careful, too choreographed. He approaches the table with exaggerated efficiency. He bows with theatrical courtesy. He carries the tray with studied concentration. He is playing at being a waiter. Why is this bad faith? Because he is treating his role as waiter as if it were his essence, as if being a waiter were something he simply is, like a stone is a stone. But he is not a waiter in the way a stone is a stone. He is a human being who has chosen to work as a waiter and who can stop at any moment. The exaggerated performance reveals the gap. If he were truly identical with his role, the performance would be natural and unconscious. The fact that he must play at being a waiter shows that he is not simply a waiter. He is a consciousness pretending to be a thing. He is in bad faith because he is trying to convince himself and others that he has no choice, that this is simply what he is, that his nature as a waiter determines his behavior. But this is false. He chose this job. He chooses to continue. He is free, but he is fleeing from that freedom into the comforting fiction of a fixed identity. Another example involves a woman on a first date. A man takes her hand. She faces a choice. She can withdraw her hand, which acknowledges the romantic advance and forces her to respond to it. Or she can leave her hand there and accept the advance. Either choice commits her to a position. Instead, she does neither. She leaves her hand in his but pretends not to notice it is there. She continues the intellectual conversation as if nothing physical were happening. She treats her hand as a thing, an object separate from her consciousness, something that exists independently of her choices. This is bad faith. She is trying to avoid choosing by splitting herself into a pure consciousness engaged in conversation and a pure body that merely exists. But this split is false. She is a unified being, and her hand is there because she chose to leave it there. She is responsible for what is happening, but she is fleeing that responsibility. The woman wants the pleasure of the romantic attention without the commitment of accepting it. She wants to remain free to deny later that anything happened. So she pretends to herself that her hand is like a stone on the table, just existing there, while her real self remains pure and uncommitted. Bad faith can also involve hiding behind social roles and norms. Someone says, I have no choice, I must support my family, or society expects this of me, or this is what people in my position do. These statements treat social expectations as if they were natural laws that determine behavior. But social expectations are not natural laws. You can defy them. Many people do. The fact that there would be consequences does not eliminate your freedom. You are choosing to accept those expectations rather than face the consequences of defying them. This is a legitimate choice, but it is a choice, not a necessity. The person who says, I had no choice, is in bad faith. There is always a choice. The choice might be between terrible options, but it remains a choice. Saying you had no choice is a way of avoiding responsibility for the choice you made. Bad faith also appears in claims about human nature. Someone says, I am just naturally shy, or I have always been this way, or that is not in my nature. These statements treat personality traits as fixed essences that determine behavior. But personality is not a fixed essence. It is a pattern of choices you have made repeatedly. You can choose differently. The shy person can choose to speak. The angry person can choose calm. The fact that these choices feel difficult does not make them impossible. When you say, I am naturally shy, you are treating shyness as something you simply are, like a stone is hard. But you are not shy in the way a stone is hard. You are shy because you repeatedly choose to avoid social interaction. You could choose otherwise. The claim of naturalness is bad faith. The structure of bad faith involves a peculiar relationship to truth. You cannot be in complete ignorance. If you did not know you were free, you could not try to hide that freedom from yourself. Bad faith requires knowing the truth at some level while refusing to acknowledge it explicitly. This is different from simply being mistaken. Someone who genuinely believes they have no freedom is not in bad faith. They are wrong, but they are not lying to themselves. Bad faith requires a kind of double awareness, knowing and not knowing simultaneously. Sartre analyzes this structure in terms of consciousness being both facticity and transcendence. Facticity refers to all the given facts about you, your body, your past, your situation. Transcendence refers to your freedom, your ability to go beyond these facts and choose your response to them. Bad faith involves emphasizing one aspect while denying the other. The waiter emphasizes his facticity, treating himself as simply a waiter thing. The woman on the date emphasizes her transcendence, treating her body as mere facticity separate from her consciousness. Both are fleeing the paradox of being simultaneously thing and freedom. You cannot escape this paradox. You are not a pure consciousness floating free of all constraints. You have a body, a past, a situation. These are facts you cannot change by willing, but you are also not a thing determined by these facts. You must choose how to relate to them. Bad faith tries to collapse this tension by identifying completely with one side, but the tension is the human condition. You are both facticity and transcendence, both determined and free. Trying to be only one or the other is dishonest. Another form of bad faith involves treating your emotions as alien forces that overcome you. Someone says, I could not help getting angry, or my jealousy took over, or I was overwhelmed by fear. These statements treat emotions as if they were external events that happened to you. But Sartre argues that emotions are choices, ways of relating to the world. Anger is not something that overcomes you. It is a way you choose to engage with a frustrating situation. Fear is not an external force. It is how you choose to relate to danger. This does not mean emotions are completely voluntary, in the sense that you can turn them on and off at will. It means that emotions involve a kind of choice at a deeper level, a choice about how to inhabit your situation. Claiming emotions simply happen to you is bad faith. People often live in bad faith regarding their past. They say, my childhood made me this way, or I cannot change because of what happened to me. The past is facticity, it happened, but it does not determine your present choices. You choose what meaning to give to your past. Two people can experience similar trauma and respond completely differently. One becomes bitter and withdrawn, the other becomes compassionate and strong. The difference is not in what happened, but in how they chose to relate to what happened. The past provides material, but you create the meaning. Claiming the past determines you is bad faith. It is treating yourself as an object shaped by causal forces rather than as a freedom that interprets and responds to those forces. Your past is a fact, but what you make of that fact is your choice. Bad faith is nearly universal. Sartre suggests that sincerity, its apparent opposite, is also a form of bad faith. The person who declares, I am sincere, this is truly who I am, is trying to coincide with themselves, to be what they are in the manner of a thing. But you can never coincide with yourself because you are always transcendence, always able to question and change. The sincere person tries to pin themselves down to declare a fixed identity. But this declaration is immediately surpassed by the freedom that made it. You cannot step into the same river twice because the river changes. You cannot be identical with yourself because consciousness is always movement, always becoming. Is bad faith avoidable? Sartre is ambiguous on this point. He suggests that authenticity, being in good faith, means acknowledging both your facticity and your freedom without fleeing into either. It means accepting that you are condemned to be free, that you have no excuses, that you must choose without certainty. But he also suggests that perfect authenticity may be impossible. The structure of human consciousness involves a gap, a not being what you are. This gap makes some degree of self-deception almost inevitable. We are beings who exist at a distance from ourselves, and that distance creates the space for bad faith. What matters is recognizing bad faith when it occurs, refusing the comfort of saying, "I had no choice," or "this is just who I am." What matters is taking responsibility for the freedom that you cannot escape, even when that freedom is terrifying. Bad faith is the attempt to avoid anguish by denying freedom. It is understandable. Freedom without essence, choice without guarantee, responsibility without excuse, these are hard to bear. The temptation to pretend you are a thing with a fixed nature is powerful, but pretending does not make it true. You remain free, you remain responsible. The waiter can quit, the woman can withdraw her hand, the person claiming their nature determines them can choose differently. Bad faith is a lie, and like all lies, it fails when confronted with reality. The look when others see you. Human consciousness exists in relation to other consciousnesses. You are not alone in the world. Other people exist, and they see you. This simple fact creates a profound disruption in your experience of yourself. Sartre calls this disruption the look. The look is the experience of being seen by another person. It is not simply being observed. An object can be observed without experiencing anything. The look involves recognizing that the other person is a consciousness, a freedom, a perspective on the world, and that you have become an object within that perspective. Sartre gives a famous example. You are alone in a room. You hear footsteps in the hallway. Curiosity grips you. You move to the door and look through the keyhole. In this moment, you are pure subject, pure consciousness directed toward what is on the other side of the door. You are absorbed in looking. You are not aware of yourself as an object. Then you hear footsteps behind you. Someone is there, in the hallway, seeing you crouched at the keyhole. Suddenly, everything changes. You are no longer pure subject. You have become an object in someone else's gaze. You are a voyeur, a person spying through a keyhole, someone engaged in a shameful act. This is the look. The other person's consciousness reaches you and transforms your experience of yourself. Before, you were simply looking, absorbed in your project. Now you are looked at, judged, categorized. You become aware of yourself as you appear to the other. Shame arises not from breaking a moral rule you believe in, but from being seen. You might not have felt shame at all if no one had caught you. The shame comes from recognizing yourself as an object for another consciousness. You see yourself through the other's eyes, and what you see is shameful. This reveals something fundamental about human relations. The other person is not simply another object in the world. They are another subject, another perspective, another freedom. When they look at you, they reduce you to an object within their world. This creates conflict. You experience yourself as a subject, as freedom, as the center of your world. But the other person experiences you as an object in their world. These two perspectives cannot be reconciled. You cannot simultaneously be subject for yourself and object for another without conflict. The look takes away your freedom in a certain sense. When you are alone, you define yourself through your projects and choices. But when another person sees you, they define you according to their perspective. They see you as tall or short, attractive or ugly, threatening or harmless. They assign you qualities you did not choose. You become aware of your body as an object. When you are alone, your body is simply how you inhabit the world. You do not think about how your body looks. You use it. But when someone looks at you, your body becomes an object that they judge. You become aware of it from the outside, and this creates alienation. There is an aspect of yourself that exists for others, an outside that you can never fully grasp because you can only experience yourself from within. The other person knows something about you that you cannot know in the same way. They know how you appear. The look also reveals your vulnerability. You cannot control what the other person sees when they look at you. You can try to manage your appearance, but their perception is their freedom. They see you according to their categories, their values, their perspective. You are at their mercy. This generates various responses. You might try to look back, to turn the other person into an object under your gaze. This is a kind of counterattack. If they reduce you to an object, you reduce them to an object. But this does not resolve the conflict, it only continues it. Or you might try to seduce the other person, to make them recognize your freedom by enchanting them. Seduction is the attempt to capture the other's freedom without destroying it. You want them to freely choose to see you as you wish to be seen, but this is unstable because their freedom remains. Or you might try to merge with the other person through love. Love, in Sartre's analysis, is the desire to be both object and subject for the other. You want to be the beloved object that grounds the other's freedom. But this too fails because you cannot force the other person to love you. Their freedom escapes you. Masochism and sadism are other responses. The masochist tries to become pure object, to eliminate the tension between being subject and being object by identifying completely with objecthood. The sadist tries to reduce the other person to pure object, to eliminate their freedom entirely. Both fail because the fundamental structure cannot be escaped. Human relations, in Sartre's early philosophy, are characterized by conflict. Other people are a threat to your freedom. They objectify you. They define you according to their perspective. They limit you. The famous line from No Exit captures this. Hell is other people. This does not mean other people are evil. It means that the very existence of another consciousness creates conflict. When two freedoms meet, each tries to define the situation according to their own perspective. Each reduces the other to an object. This conflict is structural, built into the nature of consciousness. The look can be experienced even when no one is actually looking. You walk through a city and feel yourself as an object under potential gazes. The buildings have windows. People might be watching. You adjust your behavior even though no one is actually there. The look becomes internalized. This internalized look is how society controls behavior. You police yourself because you have incorporated the perspective of others. You see yourself as you imagine others see you. You feel shame or pride based on this imagined gaze. The other people do not need to be present for their look to affect you. Language plays a role here. When someone calls you a name, assigns you to a category, they are exercising the look through words. They are defining you as a certain kind of object. You might resist this definition, but it affects you. The word has power because it comes from another consciousness. Racism and other forms of oppression work through the look. The oppressor looks at the oppressed and sees them as a category, not as an individual freedom. The oppressed person internalizes this look and begins to see themselves through the oppressor's categories. This is part of how oppression becomes psychological. Fanon, influenced by Sartre, analyzed how colonized people experience the colonizer's look. The colonized person becomes aware of their skin color, their cultural background, as objects of judgment. They see themselves through the colonizer's racist gaze. This creates a divided consciousness, alienated from itself. The look also explains certain experiences of self-consciousness. Why do you feel awkward when walking into a room full of people? Because you suddenly become aware of yourself as an object under their gazes. You lose the natural absorption in your own projects and become hyper-aware of how you appear. Sartre distinguishes between being for itself and being for others. Being for itself is your existence as a free consciousness. Being for others is your existence as an object in the world of other consciousnesses. These are two different dimensions of human existence, and they create tension. You cannot eliminate being for others by ignoring other people. Even alone, you carry the internalized look. You imagine how you would appear to others. You judge yourself according to standards that come from the social world. The other is always with you. Can this conflict be resolved? Sartre's early work suggests it cannot. The very structure of consciousness meeting consciousness creates conflict. Later, he would try to develop an ethics based on recognition and reciprocity, but in being and nothingness, the conflict seems fundamental. The look reveals that you are not transparent to yourself. Part of your being exists for others, defined by their perspectives. You can never fully grasp this part because you cannot see yourself as others see you. You can only imagine it, and your imagination is limited by your own perspective. This creates a kind of metaphysical insecurity. You want to know how you appear, to control your image, to be seen as you wish to be seen, but you cannot. The other person's freedom is beyond your control. They see what they see, and you must live with being an object in their world. The look is not always negative. Being seen can also be a kind of recognition. You exist for another consciousness. You matter in their world. But even positive recognition involves objectification. The person who admires you is still seeing you as an object, something defined according to their categories. Sartre's analysis of the look influenced later philosophers and psychologists. Lacan's concept of the gaze, Foucault's analysis of surveillance, theories of objectification in feminist philosophy, all draw on Sartre's insight that being seen by another changes how you experience yourself. The look remains one of Sartre's most powerful contributions to understanding human relations. It captures the uncomfortable truth that other people's perspectives on you are beyond your control, that you exist for others in ways you cannot fully know, and that this creates fundamental tension in human existence. Nothingness and consciousness, the whole in being. Sartre's philosophy rests on a strange claim: consciousness is nothing. This does not mean consciousness does not exist. It means consciousness exists as a kind of nothingness, a gap or hole in the fabric of being. Understanding this concept requires understanding what Sartre means by being and how consciousness differs from it. Being, in Sartre's terminology, refers to things that simply are. A rock is. A table is. These objects exist in themselves, complete and self-identical. A rock is fully what it is, with no gap between what it is and its existence. This is what Sartre calls being in itself. Being in itself is massive, opaque, fully present. It has no lack, no absence, no gap. It is what it is with complete coincidence. The rock does not wonder whether it should be a rock. It does not question its nature. It simply is, densely and completely. Consciousness is entirely different. Consciousness exists as being for itself, and its fundamental characteristic is that it is not what it is and is what it is not. This sounds like word games, but Sartre means something precise. When you are conscious of something, you are not that thing. Consciousness always involves separation, distance, a gap between the consciousness and what it is conscious of. You are conscious of the tree, which means you are not the tree. There is a space between you and the object of consciousness. This space is nothingness. It is not a thing. It is the absence of identity between consciousness and its object. Consciousness exists as this absence, this gap, this nothingness that separates it from the world. Moreover, consciousness is not identical with itself in the way a rock is identical with itself. You are aware of yourself, which means there is a split within consciousness. There is the consciousness that is aware and the consciousness that is aware of being aware. This creates an internal gap, a nothingness at the heart of consciousness itself. You can never coincide with yourself. When you try to grasp what you are, you find that the grasping consciousness is different from the consciousness being grasped. There is always a gap, always a distance. You exist at a remove from yourself. This internal nothingness is what makes freedom possible. Because you are not identical with yourself, because there is a gap in your being, you can question what you are. You can imagine being otherwise. You can choose to change. A rock cannot do this. A rock has no internal distance from itself. It is what it is, and that is the end of it. But consciousness exists as a questioning, a negation, a standing back from what is. Sartre introduces nothingness through the concept of negation. Negation is everywhere in human experience. You look for Pierre in the cafe and you do not find him. His absence is real. You experience it. But absence is not a thing. It is a nothingness that consciousness brings into the world. The cafe is full of being, full of things that are tables, chairs, other people. But Pierre is not there. This not being is real for you. You experience his absence as a presence of nothingness. The cafe becomes a ground against which Pierre's absence stands out. But this absence exists only for consciousness. The tables and chairs do not experience Pierre's absence. Absence is not a feature of being in itself. It is something consciousness introduces through negation. Consciousness brings nothingness into the world. Questions also reveal nothingness. When you ask, "Is Pierre here?" you are opening up the possibility of non-being. The question brings nothingness into play. The answer might be no, which is a negation, a kind of nothingness. Being in itself cannot ask questions. A rock does not question whether it is a rock. Questions require the ability to step back from what is and imagine what is not. This requires consciousness, which exists as the gap that makes questioning possible. Destruction also involves nothingness. When a building is destroyed, what remains? Not building, absence, a gap where something used to be. But this gap is experienced by consciousness. The rubble does not experience the absence of the building. Only consciousness registers the nothingness that destruction creates. Even perception involves nothingness. When you see a figure against a background, you are negating the background, pushing it back, making it not figure. Perception is not passive reception. It involves active negation, organizing the world into this and not that. Memory depends on nothingness. The past is not present. It is no longer. When you remember, you are conscious of something that is not here now. You introduce nothingness by reaching toward what is absent. Imagination even more clearly involves nothingness. When you imagine a centaur, you are conscious of something that does not exist. You are bringing nothingness into your experience. Imagination is the capacity to posit what is not. All of these, negation, absence, questioning, destruction, perception, memory, imagination, reveal consciousness as the source of nothingness. Being in itself contains no negation, no absence, no not. It simply is. Consciousness brings nothingness into being. This has metaphysical implications. Traditional philosophy treated being and nothingness as opposites, with being as the fundamental reality and nothingness as merely the absence of being. Sartre reverses this for human reality. Consciousness exists as nothingness, and this nothingness is as fundamental as being. Human reality is a combination of being and nothingness. You have a body, a facticity, a being in itself aspect, But you are also consciousness, which is nothingness. You are not simply what you are. You are also what you are not, what you might become, what you imagine yourself to be. This strange combination creates anguish. You are something, you have a facticity, but you are also nothing, free to become otherwise. You cannot rest in being because nothingness keeps opening gaps. You cannot rest in nothingness because you have a facticity you cannot escape. The nothingness of consciousness explains why you cannot be defined. A definition captures what something is, but consciousness is precisely not being what it is. Any definition you give yourself is immediately transcended by the consciousness that gave the definition. If you say, I am a teacher, the consciousness that makes this statement is already beyond it, questioning it, capable of choosing otherwise. The definition cannot capture consciousness because consciousness exists as the gap that escapes definition. This nothingness also explains temporality. Consciousness exists in time because it is not fully present to itself. The past is what you are no longer. The future is what you are not yet. Only the present is, and consciousness exists precisely as the gap between past and future. Being in itself has no temporality. A rock does not experience time passing, it simply persists. Time for Sartre is a structure of consciousness, arising from the nothingness that prevents consciousness from coinciding with itself in a pure present. The nothingness of consciousness creates the possibility of lying. When you lie, you are presenting what is not as if it were. This requires the ability to hold non-being in mind and present it as being. Only a consciousness characterized by nothingness can do this. Bad faith, as discussed earlier, involves a peculiar relationship to nothingness. You try to be what you are in the manner of being in itself, to fill the gap with a fixed identity. But this fails because the nothingness is structural. You cannot eliminate the gap by pretending it is not there. Nothingness also grounds the possibility of value. Being in itself has no value. A rock is not good or bad, it simply is. Value arises when consciousness introduces lack, absence, negation. Something is good because it fills a lack, but lack is nothingness that consciousness brings into the world. You desire food because you lack it, but this lack is not a feature of the universe. It is your consciousness experiencing its own incompleteness. Hunger is a way consciousness relates to being through the medium of nothingness. Sartre's concept of nothingness influenced later philosophy. Derrida's concepts of difference and absence draw on Sartre's insight. Post-structuralist thought about gaps, absences, and what is not said often echoes Sartre's focus on nothingness. The concept seems abstract, but it captures something real about consciousness. You can always step back from any state you are in and question it. This ability to negate, to introduce distance, to ask whether things might be otherwise, this is what consciousness is. Phenomenology, the philosophical method Sartre adapted from Husserl and Heidegger, focuses on describing consciousness as it is experienced. What Sartre found when he looked carefully at consciousness was that it is characterized by absence, gap, distance, negation. It is not a thing, it is a whole in being. This nothingness is not mysterious or occult. It is the everyday experience of being able to imagine otherwise, to question what is, to remember what is not present, to anticipate what has not yet happened. These capacities define human existence, and they all involve nothingness. The technical details of Sartre's analysis in being and nothingness are complex. He distinguishes different types of nothingness, different ways consciousness introduces negation into being. But the core insight remains. Consciousness is fundamentally different from things because it exists as nothingness. This nothingness is what makes you free. Because you are not identical with yourself, because there is a gap in your being, you can choose. You are not determined by what you are because what you are includes this nothingness that opens toward other possibilities. It is also what makes you anxious. Nothingness offers no ground, no foundation, no essence to fall back on. You exist as a question without a predetermined answer, as a gap without a necessary filling, as a freedom without a guide. Sartre's philosophy is often described as dark or pessimistic, but the concept of nothingness is not inherently negative. It is simply a description of what consciousness is. Whether this is good or bad depends on what you make of it. The nothingness is a fact of human existence, neither good nor evil in itself. What matters is how you respond to this nothingness. You can flee into bad faith, trying to fill the gap with a fixed identity, or you can accept the nothingness, live authentically in recognition of your freedom, and create yourself through your choices. Nothingness is the condition of possibility for everything distinctly human: freedom, imagination, questioning, value, choice. Without nothingness, you would be a thing among things, fully determined, with no gap for freedom. Nothingness is what makes you human. Anguish, abandonment, and despair, the existential trio. Sartre identifies three fundamental emotions that arise from recognizing the human condition: anguish, abandonment, and despair. These are not pathological states, they are appropriate responses to the structure of human existence. Understanding them reveals what it means to be free without essence, to exist without predetermined purpose, to choose without guarantee. Anguish is the emotion you feel when you recognize your own freedom. It is different from fear. Fear has an object. You fear the wild animal, the oncoming car, the disease. Anguish has no external object. It is the feeling of confronting your own freedom, your own capacity to choose, your own lack of determination. Imagine again the cliff example. You stand at the edge. You could jump. Nothing stops you. No barrier prevents you. Your own decision not to jump is all that keeps you from falling. You feel vertigo, not because you are afraid of falling, but because you recognize that jumping is possible, that your future depends entirely on a choice you must make. This is anguish. It is not fear of the cliff. It is recognition that your choice is the only thing between you and the abyss. You are not compelled to step back by your nature or by external force. You must freely choose to step back, and that choice is yours alone. Anguish arises whenever you genuinely recognize that you could choose otherwise. The parent feels anguish when recognizing they could harm their child. Not that they would, but that they could. Nothing in their nature absolutely prevents it. Only their choice stands between possibility and action. Most people flee from anguish. They tell themselves they are not free, that their nature determines their actions, that they would never choose otherwise. This flight is bad faith. It is the attempt to avoid the vertigo of freedom by pretending freedom does not exist. But anguish is the truth of the human condition. You are not determined. You could always choose otherwise. The fact that you have always chosen a certain way in the past does not compel you to choose that way now. Your history is facticity, not destiny. Kierkegaard, whom Sartre read carefully, described anguish as the dizziness of freedom. When you look into the abyss of your own freedom, when you recognize that nothing determines your choice, a kind of dizziness overtakes you. The ground seems to disappear beneath your feet. This anguish is intensified when you recognize that your choices create values. You are not following rules that exist independently. You are creating the rules through your choices. When you choose, you are saying, this is what one should do. You are legislating for all humanity. The weight of this is enormous. You cannot appeal to a higher authority to justify your choice. You cannot say, God commanded this, or nature requires this, because even recognizing God's authority, or nature's requirements, is your choice. The responsibility falls entirely on you. Abandonment is the second fundamental emotion. It arises from recognizing that you are alone in making your choices, that no one and nothing will make them for you. Sartre phrases this as, God does not exist, but the point applies even if God did exist. Even if there were a God who issued commandments, you would have to choose whether to obey. You would have to interpret what the commandments mean in your specific situation. You would have to decide that this voice giving commandments is indeed God and not a demon or a delusion. The choice remains yours. Abandonment means you cannot look outside yourself for the answer to how you should live. No moral system, no religious authority, no philosophical principle can decide for you. These can guide you, but only if you choose to let them guide you, and that choice is yours. The student who comes to Sartre during World War II faces abandonment. Should he join the resistance or care for his mother? Christian ethics might say honor your mother. Patriotic duty might say fight for your country, but these principles conflict, and no higher principle resolves the conflict. Sartre refuses to tell him what to do. Any advice Sartre gives would require the student to choose to accept Sartre's authority. The choice would still be the student's. The student is abandoned, left alone to decide with no guarantee that his decision is correct. This abandonment is permanent. You might wish for a sign, for clear guidance, for certainty about what is right, but signs must be interpreted. Guidance must be accepted. Certainty is impossible when you are free. You are abandoned to your freedom. Religious people sometimes believe that faith removes abandonment. They think God's will provides clear direction. But Sartre points out that choosing to obey God, interpreting what God wants, deciding that your revelation is genuine and not delusion, all of these require choice. Abandonment remains. The feeling of abandonment can be crushing. You want someone to tell you what to do, to take responsibility from you, to assure you that you are choosing correctly. But no one can do this. You are alone with your choice, and you must make it without certainty. Despair is the third emotion. It arises from recognizing the limits of your will. You can only control your own choices and actions. You cannot control their outcomes. You cannot control what other people do. You cannot ensure that your projects succeed. Sartre gives an example. Suppose you are working for social change. You commit yourself to a cause, but the success of this cause depends on many factors beyond your control. Other people must choose to join you. Historical circumstances must align. Future generations must carry on the work. You might be tempted to say, I am confident that others will join me, or I trust that the future will vindicate my efforts. But this confidence has no basis. You do not control other people's choices. You do not control the future. Hope of this kind is bad faith. Despair means accepting that you control only your own choices and nothing beyond them. You act, you commit, you choose, but you do so without any guarantee of success. The outcome is beyond your control, and you must accept this. This does not mean you stop acting. It means you act without the false comfort of certainty about outcomes. You commit to your project fully while recognizing that it might fail, that others might not join you, that the future might not cooperate. Despair, in Sartre's sense, is not depression or giving up. It is realism about the limits of your control. It is acting without the self-deception of believing you can ensure the results. It is commitment without illusion. The three emotions work together. Anguish reveals your freedom. Abandonment reveals that this freedom is unsupported by any external authority. Despair reveals that even your free choices cannot guarantee their outcomes. Together, they describe the emotional texture of authentic existence. When you live in full recognition of your freedom, when you do not flee into bad faith, these are the emotions you experience. They are not pleasant, but they are honest. Most people avoid these emotions most of the time. The world offers many distractions, many ways to forget your freedom, many structures that create the illusion of determination. Work routines, social roles, consumer culture, all of these can numb you to anguish, abandonment, and despair. But the emotions return in moments of crisis. When your routine breaks down, when the authorities conflict, when your plans fail, then you confront your freedom again. Then anguish, abandonment, and despair break through the everyday defenses. Sartre is not recommending that you cultivate these emotions for their own sake. He is describing what you experience when you see your situation clearly. If existence precedes essence, if you are condemned to be free, if there are no external guarantees, then these emotions follow. Some critics argue that Sartre's philosophy is too dark, too focused on negative emotions. But Sartre would reply that these emotions are negative only from the perspective of someone who wants guarantees and certainties. From the perspective of freedom, they are simply the truth. Anguish is appropriate when you recognize you could choose otherwise. Abandonment is appropriate when you recognize no one will choose for you. Despair is appropriate when you recognize you cannot control outcomes. These are not distortions, they are accurate perceptions. The question is not whether you can avoid these emotions, but whether you can live authentically with them. Can you accept your anguish without fleeing into determinism? Can you accept your abandonment without inventing false authorities? Can you accept your despair without giving up action? Sartre suggests that authenticity requires facing these emotions without flinching. It requires living in full recognition of your freedom, your responsibility, your isolation, and your lack of control. This is difficult, but it is the only way to live honestly. The emotions also have political implications. People who experience anguish, abandonment, and despair are less likely to follow leaders blindly, to accept unjust social structures as natural, to believe in predetermined historical destiny. These emotions break the spell of false necessity. Totalitarian systems require people to suppress these emotions. They require belief in historical inevitability, in the leader's authority, in the collective will that subsumes individual choice. Anguish, abandonment, and despair threaten these beliefs by revealing individual freedom. This is why Sartre sees existentialism as fundamentally opposed to totalitarianism. Existentialism insists on individual freedom and responsibility. It denies that history has a predetermined direction. It refuses external authorities. These positions are incompatible with totalitarian thinking. The three emotions reveal what it costs to be human. Freedom is not a gift, it is a burden. It brings anguish, abandonment, and despair. But it also brings dignity, responsibility, and the possibility of creating meaning. You pay for your humanity with these emotions. Sartre's analysis remains relevant. In contemporary life, people still flee from freedom into various forms of bad faith. They still seek authorities to tell them what to do. They still want guarantees about outcomes. The fundamental structure has not changed. What has changed is that Sartre made the structure visible. Once you have read him, once you have understood anguish, abandonment, and despair, you cannot return to innocence. You know that your comfort is purchased through self-deception. You know what you are avoiding when you avoid these emotions. This knowledge creates a choice. You can continue fleeing, now aware that you are fleeing, or you can turn and face your freedom, accepting the anguish, the abandonment, the despair that come with it. Either way, Sartre has shown you what is at stake. No exit. Hell is other people. In 1944, Sartre wrote a play that would become his most famous work outside of philosophy. No Exit takes place entirely in one room. Three people are locked in together for eternity. There are no mirrors, the lights never go out, they cannot sleep, they cannot leave. This is hell. The three characters are Garçon, a journalist who was shot as a deserter; Inez, a postal clerk who seduced her cousin's wife and drove the cousin to suicide; and Estelle, a socialite who killed her own infant. Each expects torture, fire, demons with pitchforks. Instead, they get each other. At first, they try to remain separate, to ignore each other, to exist in isolation despite sharing the room. But this proves impossible. They need each other. They need each other to confirm their self-images, to provide the recognition they crave, to tell them who they are. Garçon insists he is not a coward. He died facing the firing squad, did he not? But he needs Inez or Estelle to confirm this. He needs them to look at him and see a brave man. Without their recognition, his own claim feels empty. He cannot believe in himself without their gaze. But Inez refuses to cooperate. She sees through him. She knows he fled from battle. She calls him a coward to his face. No matter what he says, no matter how he explains himself, she denies him the recognition he seeks. She has power over him through her refusal. Estelle needs to see herself. There are no mirrors in the room. She asks Inez to tell her if her lipstick is smudged. Inez agrees, but then uses this power against her. Estelle depends on Inez's eyes to know how she looks, and Inez exploits this dependency. Garçon wants Estelle's admiration, but she can only offer shallow affection. He wants Inez's respect, but she gives only harsh judgment. Estelle wants Garçon's desire, but he needs her to confirm his courage, not his attractiveness. Inez wants Estelle's love, but Estelle cannot return it. Each character needs something from the others that the others cannot or will not provide. They are locked in a triangle of frustrated desire and failed recognition. This is their torture. No physical pain, no external torment, just each other. Garçon makes a crucial statement near the end. Hell is other people. This line has been widely misunderstood. Sartre did not mean that all human relationships are hellish. He meant something more specific about how we depend on others for our sense of self. You cannot see yourself directly. You need others to tell you who you are. But others are free. They see you according to their own perspectives, their own categories, their own needs. They objectify you. They reduce you to what you are for them, not what you are for yourself. In the play, this structure becomes inescapable. The three characters cannot leave. They cannot sleep. They cannot stop seeing each other. They are condemned to an eternal struggle for recognition that can never succeed, because each needs something different from the others. The absence of mirrors is significant. Estelle asks repeatedly for a mirror. She is used to seeing herself reflected in glass, controlling her image, maintaining her appearance. Without a mirror, she must rely on Inez's description. She has lost control over her own image. This represents the human condition. You never have complete control over how you appear to others. You can try to manage your image, but ultimately others see what they see. Their freedom in perceiving you is beyond your reach. The inability to sleep matters too. Sleep would provide escape, a temporary relief from the tension of being seen. But there is no escape. The characters must remain conscious, must continue seeing and being seen without pause or rest. The lights that never go out suggest permanent visibility. There is no darkness to hide in, no privacy, no moment when you are not potentially under another's gaze. The panopticon becomes eternal. Garçon tries to leave at one point. The door opens. He can walk out, but he does not. He cannot leave without Inez's recognition that he is not a coward. He needs her validation more than he needs freedom. He chooses to stay in hell rather than leave without the recognition he craves. This reveals something profound about human desire. We do not simply want to be. We want to be recognized as being a certain way. We want others to see us as we wish to be seen. This desire traps us in dependence on others. Inez understands the situation most clearly. She knows she is in hell. She knows the others are her torturers. She knows that each of them will torture the others simply by being themselves, by having needs that conflict, by seeing each other in ways they do not wish to be seen. She accepts this with a kind of lucidity. She does not deny what is happening. She does not try to pretend they can all get along. She sees the structure clearly and knows there is no escape from it. The play dramatizes concepts from being and nothingness. The look, the desire for recognition, the conflict between consciousnesses, the impossibility of controlling how others see you. All of these philosophical ideas become concrete in the interactions between the three characters. Garçon's bad faith is evident. He keeps insisting he is not a coward, repeating his self-justifications, demanding that others confirm his preferred self-image. He cannot simply accept what he did. He must reinterpret it, explain it, defend it. Estelle lives entirely for others. She has no substance apart from how she appears. She needs a mirror, needs others to see her and desire her, needs to maintain her image as a beautiful woman. When stripped of this reflected image, She has nothing. Inez is perhaps the most authentic of the three. She admits what she did. She does not make excuses. She knows she is cruel. She does not pretend to be otherwise. But her authenticity is twisted. She uses her clarity to torture the others. The play asks whether authentic human relationships are possible. Can two freedoms meet without conflict? Can you recognize another person without objectifying them? Can you be recognized without being reduced to an object? Sartre's answer in No Exit is pessimistic. The structure of the play suggests that human relationships are inherently conflictual. Each person needs something from the others that the others cannot freely give. Recognition must be freely granted to mean anything, but free recognition cannot be compelled. This creates an impossible bind. You need the other's recognition to confirm your self-image, but if you force them to give it, it means nothing. If they give it freely, they might not give it at all. You are dependent on something you cannot control. The sexual dynamics in the play illustrate this. Garcin desires Estelle. Estelle desires Garcin but also wants Inez's approval. Inez desires Estelle but despises Garcin. No arrangement satisfies everyone. Each person's desire conflicts with another's. Sartre wrote the play during the German occupation of Paris. Some interpret it as a commentary on collaboration and resistance. The characters are trapped together, unable to leave, forced to negotiate their relationships in impossible circumstances. This mirrors occupied France, but the play transcends its historical moment. The fundamental structure it reveals operates in all human relationships. We need others. We depend on how they see us, but we cannot control their perceptions. This creates tension that can never be fully resolved. After the war, Sartre said he regretted the line, "Hell is other people," because it had been so widely misunderstood. He explained that he meant something specific. Hell is needing others to define you, being unable to see yourself except through their eyes, being trapped in the prison of mutual objectification. The play has been performed countless times worldwide. Its single set, small cast, and intense psychological dynamics make it practical for theater companies. But more than that, audiences recognize the truth in it. They see themselves in the characters' desperate need for recognition and their inability to get it. The play ends without resolution. The three characters realize they will be together forever. They laugh, a desperate, bitter laugh. The curtain falls on their eternal torture, which requires no fire, no physical pain, only each other and their incompatible needs. Modern life sometimes resembles the room in No Exit. Social media creates a space where people constantly seek recognition from others, where they cannot control how they are perceived, where they depend on the gaze of countless others to confirm their self-image. People curate their images, seeking likes and comments, needing others to validate their existence. But they cannot control how others see them. The others are free, scrolling, judging, moving on. The need for recognition becomes a trap, just as it is in Sartre's play. The play also illuminates relationships that have become toxic. When two people are locked together by circumstance or choice, when they need things from each other they cannot provide, when they see each other in ways the other cannot accept, then the relationship becomes a version of Sartre's hell. The solution is not to avoid all relationships. That is impossible. You exist among others. You need recognition. The question is whether you can find relationships based on reciprocity rather than conflict, on mutual recognition rather than objectification. Sartre would later try to develop an ethics of reciprocity and recognition. He would argue that authentic relationships are possible when both people recognize each other's freedom and commit to supporting that freedom. But No Exit was written before this development. The play remains Sartre's most accessible work. It requires no philosophical background to understand. The situation is clear, the dialogue is sharp, the tension is palpable. Anyone can grasp what is happening and why it constitutes torture. Yet beneath the accessible surface lies the entire structure of Sartre's philosophy. The play is not just drama, it is philosophy in action, showing rather than telling, dramatizing the conflicts that arise from human consciousness encountering other consciousnesses. Hell is other people, when you need them to be your mirror, when you depend on their gaze to know yourself, when you cannot control what they see. Hell is not others in general. Hell is the structure of mutual dependence without mutual recognition, of need without satisfaction, of desire without fulfillment. The play suggests that we create our own hells through the ways we relate to each other. The three characters are not being punished by an external force. They are punishing each other simply by being themselves, by having their own needs and perspectives, by seeing each other truthfully. This is perhaps the darkest aspect of the play. The torture is not imposed from outside. It emerges from the structure of consciousness itself, from the fact that multiple freedoms exist in proximity, from the inevitable conflicts that arise when each consciousness needs something from the others. Authenticity versus inauthenticity, living truthfully. Sartre's philosophy points toward a distinction between authentic and inauthentic existence, though he uses these terms carefully and with qualifications. Authenticity means living in recognition of your freedom, accepting your responsibility, acknowledging that you create your essence through your choices. Inauthenticity means fleeing from this recognition into bad faith. The distinction is not moral in a traditional sense. Sartre does not say authentic people are good and inauthentic people are bad. He is describing two ways of relating to the human condition. Authenticity means facing the truth about existence. Inauthenticity means hiding from it. Authentic existence requires accepting that you are condemned to be free. You did not choose to exist. You did not choose to be free. But you are, and you must take responsibility for what you make of this freedom. You cannot escape it by pretending it does not exist. This means accepting anguish. When you recognize that you could always choose otherwise, that nothing determines your choice, that you are fully responsible, anguish arises. The authentic person does not flee from this anguish into comfortable fictions about human nature or external necessity. It means accepting abandonment. No one will make your choices for you. No authority can tell you definitively what to do. You must choose, and you choose alone, without guarantee that your choice is correct. The authentic person accepts this isolation. It means accepting despair. You cannot control outcomes. You can only control your own choices and actions. The world might not cooperate with your projects. Other people might not support you. The future is uncertain. The authentic person acts anyway, without illusions about control. Authenticity requires recognizing that existence precedes essence. You are not following a predetermined blueprint. You are creating yourself through your choices. What you are is what you have made yourself through your actions, and you can always make yourself otherwise. This recognition prevents you from saying, I am just naturally this way, or this is my character, or I have always been like this. These statements treat your past as if it determined your present. They deny your freedom to choose differently now. The authentic person takes responsibility for their past without being imprisoned by it. Yes, you have a history. Yes, you have made certain choices repeatedly. But you are not bound to continue. You can choose differently. Your past is facticity, not fate. Authenticity also means recognizing your responsibility to others. When you choose for all humanity. You are saying, this is how a human being should act. You cannot hide behind relativism or subjectivism. Your choice is a proposal about what humans should be. This creates enormous weight. You are not just deciding what is good for you. You are creating values through your choice. You are legislating, in a sense, for humanity. The authentic person accepts this responsibility without trying to minimize it. Inauthenticity takes many forms. The most common is pretending you have no choice. I had to do it. The situation forced me. I had no other option. These statements deny freedom. They treat yourself as an object determined by circumstances rather than as a free consciousness. Another form is hiding behind social roles. You identify completely with being a waiter, a teacher, a parent, as if these roles defined your essence. You perform the role mechanically, as if you simply are the role rather than choosing to inhabit it. Conformity is inauthentic. Following the crowd, doing what others do, accepting prevailing values without question, these avoid the responsibility of choosing for yourself. The authentic person questions, examines, decides. The inauthentic person simply follows. Letting others define you is inauthentic. You accept their labels, their categories, their judgments. You see yourself through their eyes and accept their vision as truth. You become what they say you are rather than creating yourself through your own choices. Appeals to human nature are inauthentic. Men are naturally aggressive. Women are naturally nurturing. People are just selfish by nature. These statements use false claims about essence to excuse behavior that is actually chosen. Sartre is particularly critical of the spirit of seriousness, the attitude that treats values as if they existed objectively in the world. The serious person believes that wealth is inherently valuable, that success is inherently good, that certain achievements matter in themselves. But values do not exist in themselves. You create them through your commitment. Money has value because people choose to value it. Success matters because people choose to pursue it. Nothing is valuable in itself, apart from human freedom creating value. The serious person mistakes created values for discovered facts. They treat their values as if they were inscribed in the nature of things rather than produced by human choice. This allows them to avoid responsibility for their values. Authenticity requires recognizing that you created your values and could create different ones. You are not discovering what is objectively valuable. You are making certain things valuable through your commitment to them. This responsibility cannot be evaded. The question arises, is authenticity possible? Can you live in constant recognition of your freedom without any self-deception? Sartre is ambiguous on this point. He suggests that complete authenticity may be impossible because consciousness always exists at a distance from itself. You can never fully coincide with yourself. There is always a gap between the self that chooses and the self that reflects on choosing. This gap creates the possibility of bad faith. You can always use one aspect of yourself to hide from another aspect. But this does not mean you should not strive for authenticity. Even if perfect authenticity is impossible, you can live more or less authentically. You can recognize your freedom more or less clearly. You can take responsibility more or less fully. Authenticity is not a state you achieve once and for all. It is a constant struggle, a repeated choice to face your freedom rather than flee from it. Every day, every moment, you can choose authenticity or bad faith. The authentic person lives with uncertainty. They know their choices are not guaranteed to be correct. They know they might be wrong. They know the future is open and uncontrollable. They choose anyway, accepting the risk. This creates a kind of lightness paradoxically combined with weight. Lightness because you are not bound by predetermined essences or fixed identities. You can always choose differently. Weight because every choice is your responsibility, every value is your creation. The inauthentic person seeks heaviness without weight. They want the solidity of a fixed identity, the comfort of believing they are simply what they are, but without the responsibility that comes with choice. They want to be a thing while still being human. Authenticity has political dimensions. Oppressive systems require inauthenticity. They require people to accept their assigned roles, to believe in natural hierarchies, to think they have no choice but to obey. Authenticity threatens these systems by revealing human freedom. When people recognize they are free, that social structures are created by human choices and can be changed by human choices, they become dangerous to the status quo. Authenticity is inherently revolutionary because it refuses to accept any arrangement as natural or necessary. Sartre's engagement with Marxism reflects this political dimension of authenticity. He saw capitalism as promoting inauthenticity, encouraging people to identify with their economic roles, to accept market values as natural, to forget their freedom in the routines of production and consumption. But he also criticized actually existing communism for denying individual freedom. The communist parties demanded conformity, submission to the party line, acceptance of historical determinism. This was another form of inauthenticity, another denial of human freedom. Authentic politics would recognize that all social arrangements are chosen, that different arrangements are possible, that humans can create new forms of society. It would refuse both capitalist naturalization and communist determinism. In personal life, authenticity means honest relationships. You cannot pretend to be what you are not. You cannot hide behind masks and roles. You must acknowledge your desires, your choices, your values. You must take responsibility for how you treat others. The relationship between Sartre and Beauvoir exemplifies one attempt at authenticity. They refused traditional marriage because it imposed predetermined roles. They created their own arrangement, their own rules, their own form of commitment. They took responsibility for inventing their relationship. Whether they succeeded in living authentically is debatable. Sartre's multiple affairs, his sometimes dishonest dealings with various lovers, his political compromises, all suggest that authenticity remained an ideal rather than a fully realized practice. But perhaps this is inevitable. The point is not that Sartre perfectly embodied authenticity. The point is that he identified it as a goal, articulated what it would require, and struggled toward it despite the difficulty. Authenticity is not comfortable. It offers no reassurance, no certainty, no escape from responsibility. It demands that you face your freedom, accept your isolation, acknowledge your limits. Most people choose inauthenticity most of the time because it is easier. But inauthenticity has costs. It requires self-deception. It creates a split between what you know and what you acknowledge. It prevents genuine relationships because you are hiding from yourself and others. It limits your possibilities because you pretend you have no choice. Authenticity opens possibilities. When you recognize you are free, you can change. You are not stuck with who you have been. You can create yourself anew. The past does not bind you. Your nature does not limit you. You can choose otherwise. This is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because you have no excuses, no one to blame, no predetermined path. Liberating because you are not trapped, not determined, not fixed. You are possibility, becoming, freedom. Sartre's vision of authenticity influenced later existentialists and phenomenologists. Heidegger's concept of authenticity, though different in details, shares the basic structure. Camus' notion of living without illusions echoes Sartre's rejection of bad faith. The concept remains relevant today. People still flee from freedom. They still hide behind roles and labels. They still pretend they have no choice. The mechanisms of bad faith have not changed even if the specific content has evolved. What Sartre offers is a way of seeing through these mechanisms, of recognizing when you are lying to yourself, of understanding what authenticity would require. Whether you choose authenticity is up to you, but you cannot say you were not told what the choice involves. The project, your life as a work in progress. Human existence, for Sartre, is fundamentally a project. You are not a completed thing. You are not a finished product. You are constantly in the process of making yourself. This making is not optional. It is the structure of human reality. You are a project whether you acknowledge it or not. A project has a particular structure. It involves moving from what is toward what is not yet. It involves transcending your current state toward a future possibility. This movement defines consciousness. You are always already projecting yourself beyond where you are now. Even sitting still involves a project. You are sitting in order to rest, or to read, or to wait. The sitting has meaning only in relation to what you are doing and why. You are never simply present like a stone is present. You are always oriented toward a future that gives meaning to your present. This future orientation is fundamental. The past is fixed, settled, complete. The present is vanishing even as you experience it. Only the future is open, uncertain, filled with possibility. Consciousness exists primarily as a relationship to this open future. Your fundamental project is yourself. You are making yourself into something. You might not be conscious of this at every moment, but it structures everything you do. Each choice contributes to the self you are creating. Each action adds another layer to what you are becoming. This does not mean you have a clear plan for your life. Most people do not. The project is more fundamental than conscious planning. It is the basic movement of existence toward possibility, the constant transcendence of what is toward what might be. You project yourself into various specific projects. You pursue a career, a relationship, a creative work, a political cause. These specific projects express your fundamental project of making yourself. Through them, you are defining what kind of person you will be. But no project is ever complete while you live. You cannot finish making yourself because you are always still existing, still choosing, still able to change direction. Completion would mean death, the final fixing of what you were. This incompleteness is essential to human reality. You are never done. You can never say, now I am finished, now I am complete, now I am fully what I am. As long as you exist, you are in process, under construction, becoming. This contradicts the common desire to find yourself, to discover who you really are. The search assumes there is a completed self waiting to be found, but there is no such self. There is only the self you are making through your choices, and it is never finished. People often feel they need to discover their purpose, their calling, their true path, but purpose is not discovered, it is created. You make your life meaningful by committing to projects, not by finding a predetermined meaning hidden somewhere. This can be disorienting. It would be comforting to believe that somewhere inside you is your true self, waiting to be found. The job counselor could help you discover it. The therapist could help you uncover it. The right experience could reveal it. But Sartre says no, there is nothing to discover. There is only what you choose to make. You are not excavating a buried treasure. You are building something from materials that have no inherent form. The materials are your facticity, your body, your past, your situation, your historical moment. These are given. You did not choose them, but what you make of them is not given. That is your freedom, your project. Someone born into poverty has different facticity than someone born into wealth, but both face the same existential situation. They must choose what to make of their circumstances. The poor person is not determined to remain poor. The wealthy person is not determined to remain wealthy. Both are free to choose. This does not mean the choices are equally easy. Facticity matters. It constrains what is possible, but it does not determine what you choose within the realm of possibility. The project always involves both the given and the chosen. Your fundamental project can change. People sometimes experience radical conversion, a complete reorientation of how they relate to the world. The committed atheist becomes a believer. The conventional person becomes a revolutionary. The successful professional abandons everything for art. These conversions reveal that no project is necessary. You are not locked into the path you have been following. At any moment, you can choose differently. You can adopt a new fundamental project, a new way of making yourself. But such changes are rare and difficult. Your fundamental project structures your entire world. It determines what you value, what you notice, what matters to you. Changing it means changing your entire relationship to reality. Most people maintain roughly the same fundamental project throughout their lives. They choose security or achievement or pleasure or service, and they organize their lives around this choice. But the consistency is chosen, not necessary. Sartre analyzes various fundamental projects in his biographical works. His massive study of Flaubert, the family idiot, attempts to understand Flaubert's fundamental project, the basic way Flaubert chose to make himself through his writing. This approach treats biography as philosophy. Understanding a person means understanding their fundamental project, the basic choice that organizes their existence. You cannot reduce this to psychological or social causes. The project is a free choice, even if made in response to given circumstances. Your project gives unity to your life. Without it, your various actions would be disconnected, meaningless. The project connects them, makes them part of a coherent whole. You are not a random collection of behaviors. You are a unified movement towards self-creation. But this unity is fragile. It depends on your continued commitment. You can always abandon your project, change direction, become something else. The unity is achieved through choice, not given by nature. Projects can conflict. You might want to be a successful professional and a devoted parent, but the demands conflict. You might want to pursue art and financial security, but these pull in different directions. Managing these conflicts is part of the human condition. Some people resolve conflicts by hierarchy. One project becomes primary and others subordinate. Career comes first, relationships second, or family comes first, personal ambition second. This hierarchy is chosen, not given. Others try to balance competing projects without hierarchy. This requires constant negotiation, constant adjustment. The balance is never stable because each project makes demands that the others resist. Still others fragment, living divided lives. They are one person at work, another at home, another with friends. The fragments do not connect. This fragmentation is a failure of the project to unify existence. Sartre criticizes projects based on bad faith. The person who makes their project being a respectable member of society is fleeing into conformity. They are letting others define what they should be rather than choosing for themselves. The person who makes their project being what I naturally am is denying their freedom. They treat themselves as having a fixed nature rather than recognizing they are creating their nature through choices. An authentic project acknowledges both freedom and facticity. It recognizes that you are making yourself, that you could make yourself otherwise, that you are responsible for what you become. It does not hide behind false necessity or predetermined nature. The authentic project also acknowledges others. You are not creating yourself in isolation. Your projects affect others. Their projects affect you. You exist in a social world where projects intersect, conflict, and cooperate. Sartre struggled with how to think about collective projects. Can a group have a project? Can we speak of a collective self-creation? His later work tries to address this, particularly in Critique of Dialectical Reason. He argues that groups can form around common projects, but the group exists only through the individual commitments that constitute it. The project remains fundamentally individual even when coordinated with others. Revolutionary movements illustrate this. Individuals commit to the revolutionary project. They coordinate their actions. They create something beyond what any individual could achieve alone. But each person must choose their commitment. The collective project depends on individual freedom. Your project can fail. You might pursue something for years, only to realize it was based on self-deception. You might commit to a goal that proves empty when achieved. You might discover that what you were making yourself into is not what you want it to be. Failure does not negate freedom, it reveals it. The fact that you can fail shows that nothing guaranteed success. The fact that you can recognize failure shows that you can step back and evaluate your project. You can choose differently. Some projects are impossible from the start. You cannot be God, cannot be a thing in itself, cannot coincide with yourself, cannot eliminate your freedom. Sartre suggests that many human projects are secretly desires to be God, to achieve impossible self-sufficiency. These impossible projects create perpetual frustration. You pursue something that cannot be achieved. You fail, but you cannot admit the impossibility, so you try again. The failure is built into the structure of the project itself. Recognizing the impossibility allows you to choose realistic projects. You cannot be God, but you can create meaning. You cannot eliminate your freedom, but you can choose what to do with it. You cannot be complete, but you can commit to projects that matter. The project structure applies even to people who claim they have no projects, who drift without direction, who refuse commitment. Drifting is itself a project, a way of relating to existence. Refusing commitment is a commitment to refusal. You cannot escape having a project because you cannot escape being human. As long as you exist, you are projecting yourself toward possibilities. The question is only whether you acknowledge this or pretend it is not happening. Death ends the project. At death, you become fixed, complete, a being in itself. You are no longer making yourself. You are what you were. Others can now judge you as a totality because the totality is finished. This is why death has special significance for Sartre. It is the ultimate absurdity, the external limit that comes from outside your freedom. You do not choose when to die in most cases. Death simply arrives and freezes your project incomplete. Your life is thus always unfinished, always in process. You are always on the way, never arrived. You are always becoming, never simply being. This is the human condition, and there is no escape from it while you live. The project gives life its dynamic character. You are not a static thing. You are movement, change, becoming. This movement is not random. It is directed by your choices, organized by your fundamental project, aimed toward the self you are creating. Understanding yourself means understanding your project, not your personality type, not your psychological profile, not your social role, your project. What are you making yourself into? What future are you choosing? What self are you creating? This question has no final answer while you live. The project continues, changes, develops. You are always in the middle of the story, never at the end. You are always writing the next chapter, never reading the completed book. Condemned to be free, why there are no excuses. Sartre makes one of his most famous statements in Existentialism is a Humanism. We are condemned to be free. The phrase captures a paradox. Condemnation suggests something forced upon you against your will. Freedom suggests the absence of force. How can you be condemned to freedom? The condemnation refers to the fact that you did not choose to be free. You simply find yourself existing, and existing means being free. You cannot refuse this freedom. You cannot hand it back. You are stuck with it whether you want it or not. This freedom is total. It is not limited to certain domains while absent from others. You are free in every situation, no matter how constrained. Even the prisoner is free because he must choose how to respond to his imprisonment. The totality of freedom means there are no excuses. You cannot blame your genes, your upbringing, your circumstances, your unconscious, your society. These all contribute to your situation, but they do not determine your response. You choose your response, and you are responsible for that choice. This sounds harsh. People suffer from circumstances they did not create. Poverty, abuse, discrimination, trauma, these are real and terrible. How can Sartre say people are free and responsible in such circumstances? He is not denying that circumstances matter. He is denying that circumstances determine your response. Two people can face similar trauma and respond differently. One becomes bitter, the other compassionate. The trauma is the same, the response is chosen. This does not mean the trauma is acceptable. It means that even victims retain their freedom to choose how the trauma will define them. They can choose what meaning to give to what happened. This choice is their freedom, even in the worst circumstances. The claim that there are no excuses seems cruel to people suffering, but Sartre means it as a recognition of human dignity. To say you have no excuses is to say you have freedom. To deny excuses is to affirm that you are not simply a product of forces beyond your control. Determinism, in any form, denies human dignity. It says you are like a billiard ball, moved by forces, determined by prior causes. Sartre rejects this completely. You are not determined because consciousness is not a thing that can be determined. Psychological determinism says your unconscious drives determine your choices. But Sartre argues that you choose your relationship to your unconscious. You can seek therapy. You can resist certain impulses. You can interpret your desires differently. The unconscious provides material, not determination. Social determinism says your class position or cultural background determines your worldview. But people from the same background think differently. People can critique their own culture, reject their class values, imagine different social arrangements. Social position influences but does not determine. Biological determinism says your genes determine your behavior. But identical twins with identical genes make different choices. Genetic predispositions affect probabilities, not destinies. You choose what to make of your biological inheritance. The insistence on freedom can sound like victim blaming. If people are free and responsible, does this mean the poor are responsible for their poverty? Does this mean the oppressed are responsible for their oppression? No. Sartre distinguishes between responsibility for your situation and responsibility for your response. You are not responsible for being born into poverty. You are responsible for what you choose to do about it. You are not responsible for oppression. You are responsible for whether you resist or accommodate. This distinction matters politically. Oppressors try to make victims responsible for oppression itself, to claim that the poor are poor because of their choices, that the oppressed somehow deserve their treatment. This is bad faith. But victims also have freedom and responsibility. They can choose resistance or accommodation, defiance or submission, solidarity or isolation. These choices matter. They are not determined by the oppression itself. Sartre's own political engagement reflected this view. He opposed colonialism, capitalism, racism. He recognized real oppression and injustice. But he also insisted that the oppressed must choose their liberation. No one can free them if they do not choose freedom. The condemnation to freedom means you cannot not choose. Even refusing to choose is a choice. Even letting others decide for you is your choice to let them decide. You cannot escape responsibility by passivity. Someone says, I just went along with what everyone else was doing. This is a choice. You chose to go along. You could have refused. The fact that refusal would have been difficult does not make it impossible. You chose the easier path, and that choice was yours. Someone says, I was just following orders. This is the classic evasion of responsibility. But following orders is a choice. You could have disobeyed. Soldiers who refuse immoral orders exist. The choice to obey was yours, and you are responsible for it. Someone says, I had no choice but to take this job. But you did have a choice. You could have remained unemployed. You could have taken a different job. You could have moved to a different city. These alternatives might have been terrible, but they were possible. You chose this job over those alternatives. The point is not that all choices are equally easy. The point is that they are choices. Difficult circumstances make some choices much harder than others. But hard is not the same as impossible. As long as a choice is possible, you are free and responsible. This creates what Sartre calls the weight of responsibility. You are responsible not just for your actions, but for the meaning of your actions. You are responsible not just for yourself, but for the image of humanity you create through your choices. When you choose cowardice, you are not just being cowardly. You are saying that cowardice is a legitimate human response. When you choose courage, you are saying that courage is what humans should be. Your choice is a proposal about human nature. This makes every choice momentous. You cannot make a trivial choice because every choice carries this weight. You are always choosing what humans should be. You are always creating values. You are always proposing a vision of humanity. Most people find this unbearable and flee into bad faith. They pretend their choices are trivial, that they do not matter, that they are just doing what anyone would do. But this is self-deception. Your choices always matter because they define what you are and propose what humans should be. The condemnation to freedom means you are alone. No one else can choose for you. No authority can legitimately make your decisions. You might delegate certain choices to experts, but delegating is itself your choice. The ultimate responsibility remains yours. This aloneness is part of abandonment. You are abandoned to your freedom, left alone to choose without guarantee, without assurance, without certainty. This is the human condition, and you cannot escape it. But aloneness does not mean isolation. You exist among others. Your choices affect them. Their choices affect you. You are alone in the sense that you must choose, but you are not alone in the world. The absence of excuses has therapeutic implications. Psychotherapy often focuses on understanding how your past shaped you. This can be valuable for understanding your facticity, but it becomes problematic if it suggests the past determined you. Sartre's approach would say, yes, understand your past, but recognize that you are choosing now how to relate to that past. You are choosing what meaning to give it. You are choosing whether it will continue to define you or whether you will define yourself differently. This shifts the focus from explanation to choice. The question is not why am I like this, but what will I choose to be? The past provides context, but the future is open. You are creating yourself now, not discovering what the past made you. Some critics argue this places too much burden on individuals. People genuinely are shaped by forces beyond their control. To insist on total freedom and responsibility ignores real constraints. Sartre would reply that he is not denying constraints. He is denying that constraints eliminate freedom. You are free within constraints, not despite them. The constraints define your situation, but your response to that situation is free. A person in a wheelchair faces constraints on mobility. These are real, but how they respond to these constraints is their choice. They can become bitter or resilient, passive or active, isolated or engaged. The constraint does not determine the response. This is not meant to minimize the difficulty. It is meant to recognize the dignity of choice even in difficult circumstances. To say someone has no choice is to deny their humanity, to treat them as a thing moved by forces. The insistence on freedom connects to Sartre's opposition to racism and colonialism. Racists claim that race determines character, that some people are naturally inferior. This is a denial of freedom, an attempt to treat humans as things with fixed essences. Colonizers claim that colonized peoples are not ready for freedom, that they need guidance, that they cannot govern themselves. This too denies freedom, treats humans as less than fully human. Sartre's response is absolute. All humans are free. Freedom is not something you earn or achieve. It is the structure of human consciousness itself. No one is naturally inferior. No one needs a master. Everyone is condemned to be free. This political dimension of Sartre's philosophy explains his engagement with anti-colonial movements. He supported Algerian independence, Cuban Revolution, Vietnamese resistance. He saw these as struggles for freedom against systems that denied freedom. The absence of excuses applies to political leaders as much as anyone. The dictator cannot say, "I had no choice but to use violence." The collaborator cannot say, "I had to go along to survive." The oppressor cannot say, "This is just how things are." All of these are evasions of responsibility. The choices were made, the responsibility exists. No appeal to necessity, tradition, or circumstance eliminates it. But the absence of excuses also applies to the oppressed. They cannot say, "We have no choice but to submit." They can choose resistance. Many do. The fact that resistance is dangerous does not make it impossible. Sartre's position here is demanding. He is asking people to take responsibility even in terrible circumstances, even when they are victims, even when they suffer. This seems harsh, but he would argue that denying responsibility denies dignity. To say you have no choice is to treat yourself as less than human. To affirm your choice, even in suffering, is to affirm your humanity. The existential psychoanalysis Sartre proposes focuses on the fundamental choice, the basic project that organizes a person's life. This choice is not usually conscious. Most people do not explicitly choose their fundamental project, but it can be uncovered through analysis. Understanding your fundamental project means understanding how you have chosen to make yourself. This is different from understanding your past traumas or unconscious drives. It is understanding the meaning you have created, the self you have built. Once you understand your fundamental project, you can change it. You are not stuck with it. You chose it, and you can choose differently. This is the therapeutic possibility. Radical change through radical choice. Traditional therapy might say you are anxious because of your childhood. Existential therapy would say you are choosing anxiety as a way of relating to the world, and you can choose differently. This does not mean childhood does not matter. It means childhood does not determine your present choice. You are choosing now to continue patterns learned then. You can also choose to abandon those patterns. The absence of excuses extends even to extreme cases. Someone says, "I was brainwashed," but even brainwashing does not eliminate freedom completely. People resist brainwashing, some do not. The difference is choice, even if choice made under extreme pressure. This is not to minimize brainwashing or excuse those who do it. It is to recognize that human freedom is remarkably resilient. Even in the worst circumstances, even under the most extreme pressure, some core of freedom remains. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, made a similar point. Even in the camps, even facing death, people retained the freedom to choose their attitude. Some maintained dignity, helped others, found meaning, others did not. The circumstances were the same, the responses differed. Sartre's point is not that circumstances do not matter. They matter enormously. The point is that they do not determine everything. Some space for choice remains, and in that space, you are free and responsible. This has implications for how we think about mental illness. Is depression a choice? Sartre would say that depression involves choices about how to inhabit your situation, even if those choices are not fully conscious. This does not mean depression is easy to overcome or that people are to blame for being depressed. It means that recovery involves choosing differently, taking responsibility for your relationship to your condition. The chemical basis of depression does not contradict this. Chemicals affect your facticity, your situation, but how you respond to that situation still involves choice. Medication can help by changing the situation you face, but the response remains yours. The condemnation to freedom is permanent. You cannot graduate from it. You cannot achieve a state where you are no longer free. As long as you are conscious, as long as you exist, you are free and responsible. This makes freedom both gift and burden. Gift because you can always choose differently, always change, always become something new. Burden because you can never rest, never escape responsibility, never claim that you had no choice. Sartre's vision is demanding. It offers no comfort, no escape, no relief from the weight of freedom. But it also offers no limits except those you accept. You are not trapped by your past, your nature, or your circumstances. You are only trapped by your choices. The question is whether you can bear this freedom. Can you live without excuses, without blaming others or circumstances, without claiming that you had no choice? Can you take full responsibility for what you are and what you are becoming? Most people cannot, most of the time. They flee into bad faith, into comfortable fictions about determination and necessity. They pretend they are not free because freedom is too heavy to bear. But the freedom remains whether you acknowledge it or not. You are condemned to it. The only question is whether you will live honestly with your condemnation or hide from it in self-deception. Sartre versus Camus, the friendship that exploded. In the years immediately after World War II, Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus were the two most prominent intellectuals in France. They were friends, allies, fellow travelers in the existentialist movement. They stood together against fascism, against oppression, for human freedom and dignity. Then they destroyed each other publicly. The break came in 1952, but the tensions had been building for years. Camus and Sartre were never as similar as the outside world believed. They were grouped together as existentialists, but Camus rejected the label. Their philosophies diverged in crucial ways. Camus was 11 years younger than Sartre. He came from poverty in Algeria, a working-class background that marked him deeply. He never forgot what it meant to struggle, to go hungry, to live on the margins. This shaped his politics and his philosophy. Sartre came from the Parisian bourgeoisie. He was educated at elite institutions. His struggles were intellectual and existential, not material. He could afford to be abstract in ways that Camus, who had lived real poverty, could not. Their first major philosophical difference concerned the absurd. Camus wrote The Myth of Sisyphus in 1942, exploring the absurdity of existence. Life has no inherent meaning. We exist in an indifferent universe. This creates the absurd, the confrontation between human need for meaning and the universe's silence. Camus' response to the absurd was rebellion. You cannot eliminate the absurd, but you can refuse to surrender to it. You live in full awareness of absurdity while refusing to be crushed by it. Sisyphus pushes his rock up the hill, knowing it will roll down, and he is happy. Sartre's approach was different. Existence is absurd because it has no predetermined essence, no given meaning, but humans create meaning through their choices. The absurd is overcome, in a sense, through the creation of values and commitment to projects. This difference mattered. Camus emphasized limits, acceptance, living within the absurd. Sartre emphasized freedom, transcendence, creating meaning through choice. Both addressed meaninglessness, but they responded differently. Their political differences emerged more slowly. Both were on the left. Both opposed colonialism and capitalism. Both believed intellectuals had a responsibility to engage with politics, but they disagreed fundamentally about means and methods. Camus wrote The Rebel in 1951. The book was a long meditation on revolution and violence. Camus argued that rebellion must have limits, that revolutionary violence betrays the values that justified rebellion in the first place. He attacked the logic of revolution that justifies present murder for future justice. He criticized Marxist thought for sanctioning violence in the name of historical necessity. He argued that rebellion must affirm life, not destroy it in the name of abstract futures. The book implicitly criticized Soviet communism and those intellectuals who excused Soviet crimes in the name of historical progress. This was dangerous territory in Paris in 1951, where many intellectuals maintained complex relationships with the French Communist Party. Sartre had been moving closer to Marxism. He was trying to reconcile existentialism with communist thought. He believed the working class was the revolutionary subject of history, even though he disagreed with the Communist Party on many points. When The Rebel appeared, Sartre's journal Les Temps Modernes published a review. Sartre did not write it himself. He assigned it to Francis Jeanson, a younger philosopher who admired Sartre and opposed Camus' position. Johnson's review was devastating. He accused Camus of philosophical naivety, of moralism that ignored historical realities, of bourgeois idealism that privileged abstract principles over concrete struggle. He suggested Camus had retreated into ineffectual moralism. The review was personal and harsh. It questioned not just Camus's arguments, but his motives and character. It treated The Rebel as a betrayal of the left, a gift to reactionaries who opposed revolutionary change. Camus was wounded and furious. He wrote a response addressed to Monsieur le Directeur, meaning Sartre, as editor of the journal, though using the formal mode of address that created distance. The response was bitter and accusatory. Camus defended his book and attacked Jeanson's review as a misreading. But more than that, he attacked Sartre for hiding behind Jeanson, for not writing the review himself while obviously approving it. He accused Sartre of intellectual cowardice. He also accused Sartre of being a comfortable Parisian intellectual who had never known real poverty or oppression, who philosophized about revolution from a position of privilege, who had never had to make the hard choices that revolution requires. This was cutting. It touched on class differences between them, on the fact that Sartre came from comfort, while Camus came from struggle. It suggested that Sartre's revolutionary rhetoric was cheap because he risked nothing. Sartre responded in the same issue of the journal. His response was long, detailed, and absolutely brutal. He addressed Camus formally as well, maintaining the cold distance. He defended Jeanson's review and expanded on its criticisms. He accused Camus of turning his back on history, of retreating into abstract moralism, of abandoning the fight for justice because the fight involved moral compromise. He suggested Camus had become conservative, preferring purity to effectiveness. He attacked The Rebel as philosophically confused, mixing together different kinds of rebellion, failing to understand historical materialism, offering nothing practical for people actually engaged in struggle against oppression. And he made it personal. He suggested that Camus' success and fame had changed him, that the working-class boy from Algeria had become a bourgeois moralist, comfortable enough to lecture revolutionaries about their methods. The exchange was public, published for all to see. Two of the most famous intellectuals in France, former friends and allies, tearing each other apart in print. The intellectual world watched in fascination and horror. They never spoke again. Camus died in a car accident in 1960. When Sartre heard the news, he was reportedly shaken. He wrote a brief, moving tribute calling Camus' death an absurdity, noting that their quarrel did not diminish what Camus had accomplished. But the friendship was gone, destroyed by the argument over politics and revolution. What caused such bitterness between two men who had stood together against fascism? The core issue was the problem of violence. Camus argued that revolutionary violence corrupts the revolution, that you cannot build a just society through murder, that means affect ends. Sartre argued that oppression itself is violence, that revolution against violence requires force, that purity is a luxury the oppressed cannot afford. This was not an abstract debate, it concerned real events, Soviet purges, revolutionary movements in colonized countries, the use of torture and terrorism in struggles for liberation. Should intellectuals support these movements despite their methods? Camus said no. Support rebellion but oppose murder. Affirm life even in revolt. Maintain limits even when fighting for justice. Revolutionary violence betrays the rebellion by treating humans as means rather than ends. Sartre said this was idealism. Real oppression requires real resistance. You cannot fight colonialism with pure hands. The oppressed have the right to use violence against their oppressors. Condemning their methods from a position of comfort is complicity with oppression. The argument reflected their different experiences. Camus grew up in Algeria among the poor, both European settlers and Arabs. He knew the complexity of colonial society, the way violence affected real people, the moral weight of killing. Sartre knew this intellectually but had not lived it. His anti-colonialism was theoretical, based on principle rather than experience. He could support Algerian independence abstractly without feeling the human cost the way Camus did. Camus saw the French settlers in Algeria as his people, working-class Europeans who had lived there for generations. He opposed colonialism, but could not simply condemn everyone who was French in Algeria. The situation was complicated. Sartre saw the issue more clearly. Colonialism was wrong. Algeria should be independent. The settlers would have to accept this. Complexity was an excuse for delay. Justice was simple, even if achieving it was hard. Their philosophical differences reinforced their political split. Sartre's existentialism emphasized freedom, choice, the creation of values through commitment. This supported revolutionary action. You choose your values by committing to change. Camus' philosophy of the absurd emphasized limits, the irrationality of violence, the importance of not betraying your rebellion through excessive means. This led to a more cautious, measured politics. But there was also personality. Sartre was a systematic philosopher, confident in his ability to work out the logic of situations. Camus was more literary, more intuitive, more focused on lived experience than abstract systems. Sartre could accept contradictions and work through them dialectically. Camus felt contradictions more painfully, saw them as genuine dilemmas without clean solutions. Sartre was a hedgehog, Camus a fox. The break hurt both men. They had been friends for nearly a decade. They had worked together, written together, supported each other's careers. The public nature of the split made it worse, turning a personal rupture into a political event. Looking back, both made valid points. Camus was right that revolutionary violence can betray revolutionary ideals. That means affect ends. That abstract future justice does not justify present murder. History proved him right about Soviet communism. Sartre was right that oppression is itself violence, that the oppressed have the right to resist by force, that condemning resistance from a position of privilege is problematic. The success of anti-colonial movements proved that change sometimes requires force. The tragedy is that they could not find a way to hold both truths together. Camus' emphasis on limits and Sartre's emphasis on commitment were not necessarily incompatible. A politics that affirmed both might have been stronger than either alone. But the Cold War context made compromise impossible. You were either with the communists or against them, either supporting revolution or defending the status quo. The middle ground disappeared, and intellectuals had to choose sides. Camus and Sartre chose different sides, and their friendship became a casualty of the choice. Their break symbolized a larger split in French intellectual life between those who maintained faith in Marxist revolution and those who became disillusioned with it. After Camus' death, Sartre moved further left, supporting Third World liberation movements, opposing the Vietnam War, aligning with Maoism for a period. He never lost faith in revolutionary change, though he became increasingly critical of the Soviet Union. Would they have reconciled if Camus had lived? Sartre suggested they might have. The issues that divided them, Soviet communism, revolutionary violence, became less acute as time passed. But Camus died at 46, and reconciliation remained hypothetical. The debate between them continues. Every generation faces versions of the same question. Do you compromise with injustice or fight it by any means necessary? Do you maintain your principles or accept moral complexity in pursuit of justice? Camus represents the voice that says some things are not worth the cost, that purity matters, that you become what you do regardless of your intentions. Sartre represents the voice that says passivity is complicity, that change requires commitment, that perfect hands accomplish nothing. Both voices are necessary. Both contain truth. The tragedy is when they cannot hear each other, when disagreement becomes enmity, when intellectual difference destroys personal connection. That happened with Sartre and Camus, and something valuable was lost. Engagement. The intellectual must act. Sartre believed that intellectuals have a responsibility to engage with the world. Engagement or l'engagement became one of his central concepts. The intellectual cannot remain neutral, cannot retreat into pure contemplation, cannot avoid taking sides in the struggles of their time. This position marked a break with a long tradition. For centuries, intellectuals prided themselves on detachment. They studied, they thought, they wrote, but they remained above the fray of politics and social conflict. Truth was their goal, and truth required distance from partisan involvement. Sartre rejected this completely. Detachment is impossible. Even refusing to take a position is taking a position. The intellectual who claims neutrality is supporting the status quo. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity with injustice. This idea emerged from Sartre's experience during World War II. Before the war, he had been relatively apolitical. He taught philosophy, wrote novels, pursued his philosophical work. Politics was something other people did. The German occupation changed him. Suddenly neutrality was impossible. France was occupied. People were being deported. Resistance was necessary. Sartre joined a resistance group, wrote plays that carried coded messages of defiance, and began to see intellectual work as inseparable from political commitment. After the war, he articulated this new understanding in What is Literature, published in 1947. Literature, he argued, is not a purely aesthetic activity. Writing is an act of communication, and communication is a form of action. The writer acts upon the world through words. Every sentence makes a choice. Every description emphasizes some aspects of reality and ignores others. Every narrative adopts a perspective. These choices have political implications whether the writer acknowledges them or not. The writer who claims to be apolitical is making a political choice. By not challenging the existing order, by writing as if current arrangements were natural and inevitable, the writer supports those arrangements. There is no neutral ground. Sartre distinguished between prose and poetry. Poetry, he suggested, uses words as things, exploring sound and image for their own sake. Prose uses words as tools to communicate meaning. Prose is inherently committed because it addresses the reader and asks for a response. This theory of committed literature created enormous controversy. Many writers and critics believed that art should be autonomous, free from political purposes. Making literature serve political goals, they argued, destroys its artistic value. Sartre responded that all literature is already political. The question is not whether literature is committed, but what it is committed to. The supposedly apolitical writer is committed to maintaining the illusion that literature transcends politics. He gave examples. A 19th century novelist who describes servants as naturally loyal and contented is making a political statement. They are endorsing a social hierarchy, naturalizing inequality, suggesting that the poor are happy in their subordination. A contemporary novelist who writes only about the internal psychological states of bourgeois characters is making a political choice. They are suggesting that the inner life of the middle class is what matters, that social conditions and class conflict are less important than personal feelings. Committed literature acknowledges its political nature. It takes sides. It advocates for change. It does not pretend to be above the conflicts that shape human life. It enters those conflicts deliberately, using language as a weapon in the fight for justice. Sartre's own literary work embodied this commitment. His novel trilogy, The Roads to Freedom, dealt explicitly with political choices during the late 1930s and World War II. His plays addressed moral and political dilemmas facing contemporary audiences. Dirty Hands presented the problem of political murder. Can a revolutionary justifiably kill for the cause? The play showed both sides without resolving the question definitively, but it forced audiences to confront the moral complexity of political violence. The Respectful Prostitute attacked American racism. Set in the American South, it showed how racism corrupted everyone involved, including those who considered themselves good people. The play was controversial and widely performed. His essays intervened in current political debates. He wrote about the Soviet Union, about colonialism, about the role of writers in revolutionary movements. He used his fame and his skills to influence public opinion on the issues he cared about, but engagement went beyond writing. Sartre participated in demonstrations, signed petitions, gave speeches, traveled to revolutionary countries. He put his body and his reputation on the line for the causes he supported. In 1960, he signed the Manifesto of the 121, a declaration supporting the right of French soldiers to desert rather than fight in Algeria. This was potentially treasonous. The government could have prosecuted him. His apartment was bombed by right-wing terrorists. He continued anyway. For Sartre, intellectual work and political action were inseparable. You thought in order to act. You acted in order to change the world. Thought that did not lead to action was pointless self-indulgence. This commitment shaped his relationship with Marxism. He saw Marxism as the inescapable philosophy of the age because it addressed the fundamental reality of class struggle and economic exploitation. Intellectuals had to engage with Marxism or be irrelevant. He tried to synthesize existentialism and Marxism in Critique of Dialectical Reason. The project was to show how individual freedom and historical materialism could be reconciled, how existentialist insights about consciousness could enrich Marxist analysis of society. The book was difficult and not entirely successful. Many Marxists rejected it as too individualistic. Many existentialists rejected it as a betrayal of freedom. But it represented Sartre's attempt to engage seriously with the dominant political philosophy of his time. His engagement led him into problematic positions. In the 1950s, he defended the Soviet Union against critics, minimizing evidence of Stalin's crimes. He argued that revealing Soviet abuses would aid Western imperialism and harm the working class movement. This was a failure of critical judgment. Sartre later acknowledged that he had been wrong, that he had let political commitment override intellectual honesty. But at the time, he believed that intellectuals had to support the socialist camp despite its flaws. His support for various revolutionary movements sometimes involved similar problems. He praised Mao's China without fully acknowledging the catastrophes of the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. He supported Castro's Cuba uncritically in its early years. These errors stemmed from his theory of engagement. He believed intellectuals should support revolutionary movements fighting against oppression, even when those movements had problems. Criticism should be internal, not external. The intellectual should join the struggle, not judge it from outside. But this created blind spots. Engagement can become apologetics. The desire to support the oppressed can lead to excusing their leaders' crimes. The commitment to a cause can override the commitment to truth. Sartre struggled with this tension throughout his life. He wanted to be both engaged and honest, committed and critical. He did not always succeed in balancing these demands. In the 1960s and 1970s, he supported student movements, Black Power, Palestinian liberation, Vietnamese resistance to American imperialism. He was everywhere, speaking at rallies, writing manifestos, lending his name to causes. Some critics accused him of being a professional protester, of signing petitions without reading them, of supporting whatever movement was most radical at the moment. There was some truth to this. His engagement sometimes became reflexive, but the underlying principle remained important. Intellectuals have knowledge, platforms, influence. Using these only for personal advancement or academic disputes is a waste. They should be used to fight injustice, support liberation, advocate for the oppressed. Sartre's model of the engaged intellectual influenced a generation. In France and worldwide, intellectuals felt obligated to take political positions, to support social movements, to use their work for political purposes. This had positive and negative effects. Positively, it connected intellectual work to real social struggles. It prevented the academy from becoming entirely insular. It reminded scholars that their work had consequences. Negatively, it sometimes led to intellectual dishonesty in service of political goals. It created pressure to conform to political orthodoxies. It suggested that apolitical research was somehow illegitimate. The model has fallen out of favor in recent decades. Postmodern skepticism about grand narratives, disillusionment with revolutionary movements, professionalization of academic work, all have made the engaged intellectual seem like a relic. But the questions Sartre raised remain relevant. What is the relationship between intellectual work and political action? Can scholarship be neutral? Should intellectuals take positions on political issues? Contemporary debates about academic freedom, political correctness, the role of universities in society all echo Sartre's concerns. The specific positions have changed, but the underlying tension persists. Sartre would likely argue that current claims of neutrality are as illusory as ever. Intellectuals who avoid political engagement are still making political choices. They are choosing to accept existing arrangements rather than challenge them. The university that claims neutrality on political issues is supporting the status quo. The scholar who studies only abstract questions is implicitly saying that concrete human suffering is less important than theoretical puzzles. But Sartre's own errors suggest the need for caution. Engagement can become dogmatism. Commitment can override critical judgment. The desire to support the oppressed can lead to excusing oppression when it comes from the left. A responsible engagement would combine commitment with critical distance. It would support struggles for justice while remaining willing to criticize when movements betray their own principles. It would act without abandoning the commitment to truth. This is difficult. It requires holding together apparently contradictory demands. Be committed but critical, engaged but honest, partisan but truthful. Sartre struggled with this and did not always succeed. But he was right that the struggle is necessary. Intellectuals cannot escape politics by claiming neutrality. They can only choose which politics to serve and how honestly to serve it. His life embodied this principle. He used his talents, his fame, his energy in service of causes he believed in. He made mistakes, supported some indefensible positions, but he never pretended that thought could be separated from action. The model of the engaged intellectual that Sartre represented may be unfashionable now. But the need for intellectuals to use their skills in service of justice has not disappeared. The question is not whether to engage, but how to engage responsibly. Being for itself and being in itself, the two modes of existence. Sartre's ontology, his theory of what exists, distinguishes between two fundamental modes of being. Being in itself is the mode of existence of things. Being for itself is the mode of existence of consciousness. Understanding this distinction is essential to understanding Sartre's philosophy. Being in itself is what simply is. A rock exists in itself. It is what it is, completely and without question. It does not wonder whether it should be a rock. It does not question its nature. It has no distance from itself. It simply is, massively and opaquely. This mode of being is characterized by complete self-identity. The rock is identical with itself. There is no gap between what the rock is and its existence. It is fully present, fully actual, with no internal division or distance. Being in itself is also characterized by passivity. The rock does not create itself. It does not choose its properties. It is what it is, shaped by external forces, existing according to physical laws, with no agency or self-determination. Being in itself is contingent. The rock has no reason for existing. It simply happens to exist. It could not exist, and the universe would continue indifferently. There is no necessity to its existence, no purpose it fulfills. Being for itself is entirely different. This is the mode of existence of consciousness, of human reality. Consciousness is not what it is, and is what it is not. This paradoxical formulation captures something essential about how consciousness differs from things. Consciousness is not identical with itself. When you are conscious of yourself, there is a split between the consciousness that is aware and the consciousness of which you are aware. This creates an internal distance, a gap that prevents self-identity. You can never coincide with yourself in the way a rock coincides with itself. You are always at a distance from yourself, always able to question what you are, always able to imagine being otherwise. This distance is the structure of consciousness itself. Being for itself is characterized by nothingness. Consciousness introduces nothingness into being through its capacity for negation, questioning, imagining what is not. A rock cannot negate anything. Only consciousness can say this is not or I am not. This nothingness is freedom. Because consciousness is not identical with itself, because there is a gap in its being, it can choose. It is not determined by what it is because what it is includes this nothingness, this gap that opens toward possibility. Being for itself is active. Consciousness creates itself through its choices. It is not simply given like a rock is given. It exists as a project, constantly making itself, constantly transcending what it was toward what it might become. The two modes of being are fundamentally different, but human reality combines both. You have a body, which is being in itself. You have a past, which is being in itself. But you also have consciousness, which is being for itself. This combination creates tension. You are partly a thing and partly a nothingness. You are partly determined and partly free. You are partly facticity and partly transcendence. this tension cannot be resolved. Bad faith, as discussed earlier, involves trying to collapse this tension. You pretend to be pure being in itself, claiming you are simply what you are with no freedom, or you pretend to be pure being for itself, denying your facticity and limitations. But both attempts fail. You cannot be a thing because you are conscious. You cannot be pure consciousness because you have a body and a situation. You are stuck in the middle, condemned to be both thing and freedom simultaneously. Sartre argues that human beings desire to be God, not in a religious sense necessarily, but in an ontological sense. They desire to combine the self-identity and completeness of being in itself with the consciousness and freedom of being for itself. This would be being in itself for itself, a consciousness that was also completely self-identical, a freedom that was also necessary. This is what traditional philosophy called God, a being that is its own foundation, that creates itself, that combines actuality and possibility. But this is impossible. Being in itself and being for itself are mutually exclusive. You cannot have both complete self-identity and consciousness. Consciousness requires the gap, the nothingness, the lack of self-identity. The desire for God is therefore a futile passion. Human beings pursue an impossible synthesis. They want to be fully themselves without the gap of consciousness, or to be conscious without the contingency of existence. They cannot have either. This makes human reality fundamentally unsatisfying. You are always lacking. You are never complete. You are never fully what you want to be. This lack is not something that can be filled. It is the structure of being for itself. The relationship between being in itself and being for itself explains value. Being in itself has no value. A rock is not good or bad, it simply is. Value arises when consciousness introduces lack, absence, the sense that something is missing. You value food because you lack it when you are hungry. But the lack is introduced by consciousness. The universe does not lack anything. Only consciousness experiences lack, and therefore only consciousness creates value. This means values are not objective features of reality. They are created by consciousness in relation to being in itself. Nothing is valuable in itself. Things become valuable when consciousness relates to them as fulfilling a lack. The two modes of being also explain death. When you die, you become pure being in itself. You are what you were, fixed and complete. You lose the being for itself dimension. You can no longer choose, change, or transcend yourself. This is why death is the ultimate absurdity for Sartre. It comes from outside your freedom. You do not choose it in most cases. It simply happens, transforming you from being for itself into being in itself. The living person is ambiguous, unfinished, always in process. The dead person is finished, fixed, available for judgment. Death completes your facticity and eliminates your transcendence. Sartre's ontology influenced phenomenology and existentialism. Heidegger's distinction between present at hand and ready to hand bears some resemblance, though Heidegger was working out different problems. Merleau-Ponty criticized Sartre's sharp distinction between being in itself and being for itself. He argued for a more embodied understanding where consciousness is always already involved with the world, not purely separate from it. Later, Sartre himself modified some aspects of this ontology. In Critique of Dialectical Reason, he developed a more materialist approach that gave greater weight to social and historical structures. But the basic distinction remained. The distinction helps explain many aspects of human experience. The feeling of alienation from your own body involves treating your body as being in itself, as an object separate from your consciousness. But your body is also you, part of your being for itself. The experience of being looked at by another person involves being reduced to being in itself in their gaze. They see you as an object, a thing with properties, but you experience yourself as being for itself, as freedom and possibility. The anxiety of choice involves recognizing that you are being for itself, not determined like being in itself. You must choose without anything in your nature telling you what to choose. This is freedom, but it creates vertigo. The two modes of being represent Sartre's attempt to think through the peculiar nature of human existence. We are unlike things because we are conscious, but we are not pure consciousness because we exist in a physical world with bodies and histories. This in-between status defines us. We are neither simply free nor simply determined. We are both, and the tension between these two aspects creates the drama of human existence. The ontological distinction grounds Sartre's ethics and politics. Because humans are being for itself, they are free and cannot be treated as mere objects. Any system that treats humans as things to be manipulated violates their fundamental nature. But because humans also have being in itself aspects, they face real constraints. Freedom is not unlimited. It operates within situations that are given. Ethics must account for both freedom and facticity. The distinction also explains why human relationships are difficult. Each person is being for itself, a freedom, but they encounter each other as being in itself, as objects in each other's worlds. The conflict between these perspectives creates tension. Sartre's ontology is abstract and technical, but it captures something real about human experience. You are both subject and object, both freedom and facticity, both what you are and what you are not. This paradox is what it means to be human. The emotions, not what you think they are. Sartre's theory of emotions challenges common sense. Most people think emotions happen to them, that they are overcome by anger or fear or joy. Emotions seem involuntary, forces that sweep through consciousness from some hidden source. Sartre argues this is fundamentally wrong. Emotions are not things that happen to you. They are ways you choose to engage with the world. When you are angry, you are not overcome by an alien force. You are choosing anger as a strategy for dealing with a difficult situation. This sounds implausible until you examine what emotions actually do. Sartre wrote Sketch for a Theory of the Emotions in 1939, before his major philosophical works. The essay applied phenomenological method to emotional experience, describing how emotions actually appear in consciousness rather than theorizing about their biological or psychological mechanisms. He started by criticizing existing theories. Psychology treated emotions as biological responses, chemical reactions in the body. Psychoanalysis treated them as expressions of unconscious drives. Both approaches missed something essential. Emotions are intentional. They are about something. They have meaning. When you are afraid of something. When you are angry at someone. The emotion is not just a feeling in your body. It is a way of relating to the world, of giving meaning to your situation. Traditional theories could not explain this intentionality. They treated emotions as inner states that might happen to correspond to outer situations. But the correspondence is not accidental. The emotion is precisely a way of engaging with the situation. Sartre proposed that emotions are magical transformations of the world. When you face a difficult situation that you cannot handle rationally, you transform the situation emotionally. You change its meaning through feeling rather than through action or thought. Consider fear. You encounter a dangerous animal. The rational response would be to assess the threat and take appropriate action. Run, fight, or hide. But sometimes the threat is overwhelming. You cannot run fast enough. You cannot fight successfully. You cannot hide adequately. So instead you faint. Fainting seems involuntary, something that happens to you. But Sartre argues it is a choice, not a conscious deliberate choice, but a choice nonetheless. By fainting, you magically eliminate the dangerous world. If you are unconscious, the threat does not exist for you. This seems like a stretch. People do not choose to faint. But Sartre is pointing to something real. Fainting is a way of dealing with unbearable reality by making that reality disappear from consciousness. It is a flight from the world into unconsciousness. Anger works similarly. You face an obstacle that frustrates your goals. The rational response would be to find a way around the obstacle or to modify your goals. But sometimes this seems impossible or too difficult. So instead you get angry. Anger transforms the obstacle. It becomes something to be destroyed, smashed, eliminated. The anger does not actually remove the obstacle, but it changes your relationship to it. You are no longer trying to work with reality. You are rejecting reality emotionally. Someone who slams doors and shouts when frustrated is not being overcome by anger. They are choosing anger as a response to frustration. The anger allows them to express rejection of the situation without having to actually change it. Joy functions as a transformation too. You anticipate a desired future. The rational response would be to work toward that future through patient effort. But this is difficult and uncertain. The future might not arrive. So instead, you feel joy now, as if the future were already present. The joy is a magical appropriation of what is not yet real. You possess the future emotionally rather than actually. This is why intense joy can feel somewhat unreal, dreamlike. Sadness involves a similar transformation. Something painful has happened or someone has died. The rational response would be to acknowledge the loss and gradually adapt to the new reality. But this is slow and difficult, so instead you become sad. The sadness transforms the world into something heavy, dark, demanding nothing from you. You withdraw from action into a kind of magical slowness. The world becomes the sad world, unified by your emotion. These examples make emotions sound negative or evasive. But Sartre is not condemning emotions. He is describing their structure. Emotions are strategies, ways of relating to difficult situations when rational action seems impossible or inadequate. The key point is that emotions involve consciousness. They are not purely biological reactions, though they have biological components. They are meaningful responses to situations, ways of giving significance to what you encounter. This means you are responsible for your emotions. not in the sense that you can simply stop feeling them by willing it, but in the sense that emotional responses are your way of engaging with the world. They express your choices about how to inhabit your situation. Someone who is constantly angry has chosen anger as their basic stance toward the world. They have made anger their strategy for dealing with frustration. They could choose differently, though changing such basic patterns is difficult. Someone who is chronically anxious has chosen anxiety as a way of relating to uncertainty. They transform the uncertain future into the threatening future through their emotional stance. The anxiety is not forced upon them by circumstances. It is how they choose to experience circumstances. This does not mean anxiety is easy to change or that anxious people are to blame for their suffering. It means that anxiety is a structure of consciousness, not an alien force. Understanding it as a choice, even an unchosen choice, opens the possibility of choosing differently. Sartre distinguishes between emotions and moods. Emotions are directed at specific objects or situations. You are angry at this person, afraid of that danger. Moods are more diffuse, coloring your entire experience without a specific target. But both involve consciousness choosing a way of being in the world. The depressed person has chosen depression as a fundamental orientation, though they may not be aware of this choice. The depression is their way of refusing a world that seems unbearable. This theory influenced later existential psychology and psychotherapy. If emotions are choices, then therapy can focus on helping people understand the choices they are making and consider alternatives. The person who gets angry repeatedly in similar situations can examine what the anger is doing for them. What situation is the anger transforming? What does the anger allow them to avoid? What alternative responses might be possible? This is different from simply managing anger or controlling emotional expression. It is understanding anger as meaningful, as a way of engaging with the world that serves some purpose, even if that purpose is not helpful. Sartre's theory also challenges the idea that authentic life means being in touch with your feelings. If emotions are magical transformations, ways of avoiding direct engagement with reality, then being emotional might be a form of bad faith. Authenticity would involve recognizing emotions for what they are, strategies for dealing with difficult situations. You can choose to be emotional, but you should not pretend that emotions are deeper truths or that feeling strongly means you are being genuine. The intellectual who weeps at injustice may be choosing weeping as a way of transforming unbearable reality into bearable sadness. The weeping does not necessarily indicate deeper compassion than the person who responds through sustained action. Critics argued that Sartre's theory was too cognitive, that it intellectualized emotions and missed their bodily, involuntary aspects. Emotions do not feel like choices, they feel like things that happen to us. Sartre would reply that this feeling is itself part of the emotional strategy. Part of how emotions work is that they seem to overcome us, to be forces beyond our control. This allows us to avoid responsibility for them. When you say anger overcame you, you are denying that your anger is your choice. You are treating yourself as a thing moved by forces rather than as a consciousness choosing a response. This is bad faith. But is all emotional experience really choice in Sartre's sense? What about grief at death, terror in immediate danger, joy at unexpected good news? These seem to arise spontaneously, not through deliberate choice. Sartre would argue that spontaneous does not mean unchosen. Emotions arise from consciousness engaging with situations. The engagement is not always deliberate or reflective, but it is still the activity of consciousness, not something imposed from outside. You can modify emotional responses through awareness. The person who recognizes their anger as a strategy can step back from it, consider whether it is serving them, choose a different response. This does not happen instantly, but it is possible. Emotional habits can be changed. The chronically anxious person can learn to respond to uncertainty differently. The easily angered person can develop alternative strategies. This requires work, but it is possible because emotions are not fixed mechanisms. Sartre's theory connects to his broader philosophy. If existence precedes essence, if humans create themselves through choices, then emotions cannot be predetermined responses. They must be ways consciousness chooses to engage with the world. The theory also connects to freedom. If emotions were purely biological or unconscious, they would limit freedom. But if emotions are chosen strategies, then freedom extends even to emotional life. You are free in your emotional responses, not just in your deliberate actions. This is demanding. It means you cannot excuse behavior by saying emotions made you do it. Your emotions are your responsibility. You chose them, even if the choice was not fully conscious. But it is also liberating. You are not stuck with your emotional patterns. You can change how you respond emotionally. You can develop new strategies for dealing with difficult situations. You are not a prisoner of your feelings. Modern neuroscience complicates Sartre's picture. Brain chemistry affects emotional responses. Trauma can create persistent emotional patterns. Biological factors constrain what emotions are possible. But neuroscience describes mechanisms, not meanings. The brain chemistry is part of your facticity, your situation. How you relate to that facticity remains your choice. You can seek treatment, develop coping strategies, work to change patterns. Sartre's fundamental insight remains valuable. Emotions are meaningful, not just mechanical. They are ways of relating to the world, not just things that happen in your body. Understanding them requires phenomenology, describing how they appear in consciousness, not just neuroscience. The theory also suggests limits to emotional authenticity. The culture tells you to be true to your feelings, to express your emotions honestly. But if emotions are magical transformations of reality, then being true to them might mean being false to the world. Better to recognize emotions for what they are, strategies that serve purposes, transformations that avoid direct engagement. You can feel emotions while recognizing they are your chosen responses, not truths imposed by reality. Sartre's theory of emotions is one of his less discussed contributions, but it illustrates his general approach. He takes a phenomenon that seems given and shows it involves choice and meaning. He reveals freedom where others see determination. Whether you accept his specific claims about emotions, the broader point stands. Human experience is meaningful, intentional, chosen. Even in feeling, you are not simply a passive thing. You are consciousness actively engaging with your situation, creating meaning through your responses. Imagination and freedom, creating other worlds. Imagination held special importance in Sartre's philosophy. His early work, The Imaginary, analyzed imagination phenomenologically, describing how imagined objects appear in consciousness. This work laid foundations for his later philosophy of freedom. Imagination is the capacity to think of what is not. When you imagine a centaur, you are conscious of something that does not exist. When you imagine your friend who is not present, you are conscious of an absence. Imagination brings nothingness into consciousness. This capacity is unique to consciousness. A stone cannot imagine. An animal has limited imaginative capacity. Only human consciousness can fully imagine what is not, can hold non-being in mind and relate to it as if it were real. Sartre distinguishes imagination from perception. When you perceive a tree, the tree is really there, present to your senses. When you imagine a tree, the tree is not there. It exists only as imagined, as absent, as not real. The imagined object has a peculiar status. It is nothing, not real, yet you are conscious of it. Your consciousness reaches towards something that is not there. This reaching toward the non-existent reveals consciousness as nothingness, as able to go beyond what is. Imagination requires freedom. To imagine what is not, you must be able to step back from what is. You must be able to negate the present reality and posit an alternative. This negation is freedom operating at the most basic level. A being that simply was, that coincided with itself like a stone, could not imagine. Imagination requires the gap, the distance, the nothingness that characterizes consciousness. To imagine is to exercise freedom. This connects imagination to possibility. When you imagine something, you are conscious of a possibility. The centaur is not real, but you can imagine it as possible. The different arrangement of your room is not actual, but you can imagine it as possible. Possibility is central to human existence. You live oriented toward possibilities, toward what might be rather than just what is. This orientation depends on imagination, on the capacity to think beyond the given. Sartre analyzes different types of imagination. You can imagine objects that exist elsewhere, your friend who is in another city. You can imagine objects that do not exist but could, a house you might build. You can imagine objects that cannot exist, a perfect circle, a mountain of gold, a contradiction. All of these involve negating present reality. To imagine your absent friend, you must negate their absence. To imagine the possible house, you must negate its non-existence. To imagine the impossible, you must negate the laws that prevent it. Imagination also involves a kind of belief or positing. When you imagine your friend, you posit them as existing, even though you know they are not present. When you imagine the house, you posit it as possible even though it is not actual. This positing is different from belief in the strict sense. You do not believe the imagined object is actually there, but you treat it as if it were there for the purposes of imagination. You grant it a kind of quasi-existence. Art depends on imagination. When you read a novel, you imagine the characters and events. They are not real, but you relate to them as if they were. The aesthetic experience involves this deliberate imagining of the non-existent. Sartre's theory of art emphasizes this imaginative dimension. The aesthetic object is an imaginary object. The painting is not just colored canvas. It is an imagined world that you access through the physical canvas. When you look at a painting of a landscape, you are not simply seeing paint. You are imagining the landscape through the paint. The landscape does not exist on the canvas. It exists in your imagination, prompted by the canvas. This explains why art can be powerful. It allows you to experience possibilities, to inhabit imagined worlds, to explore what is not. Art expands consciousness by exercising imagination in structured ways. Literature especially depends on imagination. The entire fictional world exists only in imagination. The reader must actively imagine the scenes, the characters, the events. Reading is creative work, not passive reception. Sartre's own literary work explored this. His novels and plays created imagined worlds that readers and audiences had to construct imaginatively. The work was collaborative. The writer provides words, the reader creates the world. Imagination also has political implications. To imagine a different society, you must be able to negate the present society. Revolutionary consciousness depends on imagination, on the capacity to conceive alternatives to existing arrangements. The person who cannot imagine differently is trapped in the present. They accept things as they are because they cannot think of how things might be. Imagination is thus a condition of political freedom. Oppression often works by limiting imagination. When people cannot imagine alternatives, they accept oppression as natural. Education that expands imagination is therefore politically liberating. Sartre's emphasis on imagination influenced his pedagogy. Good teaching does not just transmit information, it cultivates imagination, helps students conceive possibilities, encourages them to question what seems given. But imagination can also be escapist. You can flee from present reality into imagined worlds. You can live in fantasy rather than engaging with actual situations. This is bad faith, using imagination to avoid freedom rather than exercise it. The distinction between authentic and inauthentic imagination is subtle. Authentic imagination conceives real possibilities and mobilizes action toward them. Inauthentic imagination constructs impossible fantasies and substitutes them for reality. The person who imagines becoming a famous artist and then works toward that goal is using imagination authentically. The person who fantasizes about fame while doing nothing is using imagination inauthentically. Sartre's analysis of imagination also addresses mental imagery. When you imagine a tree, do you create a mental picture? Or is imagination something different from inner pictures? He argues against the mental picture theory. Imagination is not having a faint copy of perception in your mind. It is a different kind of consciousness and intending toward the absent object, not a contemplation of an inner image. This phenomenological analysis influenced later philosophy of mind. It challenged the assumption that imagination works through internal representations. Instead, imagination is a distinctive mode of consciousness, a way of relating to non-being. The capacity to imagine is also the capacity to lie. Lying requires imagining what is not the case and presenting it as if it were the case. You hold in mind both the truth and the falsehood, both what is and what you claim is. This connects to bad faith. Bad faith involves a kind of lying to yourself, holding together contradictory beliefs. Imagination makes this possible by allowing you to posit what is not as if it were. Dreams involve imagination in a special mode. In dreams, you do not recognize that you are imagining. You take the dream world as real while you are in it. Waking up involves recognizing that you were imagining, not perceiving. Sartre was less interested in dreams than Freud because dreams lack the intentionality and choice that characterize waking consciousness. Dreams happen to you. Imagination is something you do, even if not always deliberately. The relationship between imagination and emotion is important. Emotions, as discussed earlier, involve transforming the world. Imagination is the capacity that makes these transformations possible. When you are angry, you imagine the obstacle as something to be destroyed. When you are afraid, you imagine the danger as overwhelming. The emotion depends on imagination, giving the situation a certain meaning. Imagination is also involved in anticipation and memory. You imagine the future when you anticipate. You imagine the past when you remember. Both involve consciousness of what is not present, what is absent from immediate perception. This makes human temporality imaginative. You do not just exist in the present. You exist toward an imagined future and from an imagined past. Your whole temporal experience depends on imagination. The freedom that imagination reveals is vertiginous. You can imagine anything. No necessity constrains what you can think. This means your possibilities are unlimited in imagination, even if limited in action. This unlimited imaginative freedom confronts you with your responsibility. You cannot claim you never thought of alternatives. You can always imagine differently. The choice to accept things as they are is a choice, not a necessity. Sartre's philosophy of imagination connects all his major themes. Imagination reveals consciousness as nothingness, as able to go beyond being toward non-being. It is the exercise of freedom at the most fundamental level. It makes art, politics, and self-creation possible. Understanding imagination means understanding human transcendence, the constant movement beyond the given toward the possible. This transcendence defines human existence. We are not confined to what is. We can imagine and pursue what is not yet. Nausea, the novel that started it all. Before Sartre became a philosopher known worldwide, before the lectures and manifestos and political engagement, he wrote a novel. Nausea was published in 1938, and it remains one of the most powerful expressions of existentialist themes ever written. It is philosophy in the form of fiction, ideas embodied in experience rather than argued abstractly. The novel takes the form of a diary kept by Antoine Roquentin, a solitary scholar living in the fictional town of Bouville. Roquentin is writing a biography of an obscure 18th century aristocrat. He lives alone, has no real relationships, spends his days in archives and libraries. Gradually, something begins happening to him. He experiences strange moments where ordinary objects become alien, where the familiar world reveals itself as fundamentally strange. He calls this experience nausea. The nausea is not physical illness, though it has bodily symptoms. It is a metaphysical condition, a way of experiencing existence itself. Objects lose their familiar meanings and appear simply as existing, brute, and inexplicable. Roquentin picks up a pebble on the beach. Normally, you pick up a pebble and it is just a pebble, a small object defined by its use or category. But for Roquentin, the pebble reveals itself differently. It is just there, existing with no reason or purpose. The familiar labels fall away. It is not really a pebble. That is just a word humans use. It is a thing, existing, taking up space, persisting through time for no reason at all. Its existence is gratuitous, unnecessary, absurd. This experience intensifies. Roquentin sits in a cafe and looks at a glass of beer. The glass is supposed to be transparent, invisible, just a container for the beer. But he sees it differently. The glass is there, existing, being a glass. Why is it a glass? Why does it exist at all? The questions seem absurd, but they point to something real. We normally take existence for granted. Things are there, and we use them, categorize them, ignore them. We do not confront the sheer fact that they exist. Roquentin can no longer take existence for granted. He confronts it directly, and what he finds is that existence is completely contingent. Nothing has to exist. Everything just happens to exist for no reason, with no necessity. This is the absurdity at the heart of existence. We expect things to have reasons, purposes, explanations. We want existence to make sense, but it does not. Things simply are, massively and inexplicably. The most famous scene in the novel occurs in a public garden. Roquentin sits on a bench facing a chestnut tree. He looks at the root of the tree, and the root reveals itself to him in its full absurdity. The root is black, knotted, existing. He tries to think of it in familiar terms. It is part of a tree, it draws nutrients from the soil, it serves a function. But these meanings fall away. The root is simply there, existing without reason or purpose. The word absurdity is coming to life under my pen, he writes. The essential thing is contingency. I mean that one cannot define existence as necessity. To exist is simply to be there. The root could not exist. Nothing makes its existence necessary. It just happens to be there, as do all things. This contingency is nauseating because we crave necessity. We want things to have to be the way they are. Roquentin's nausea reveals what Sartre would later call being in itself. The root exists in itself, with complete self-identity, no consciousness, no freedom, just brute existence. And that existence has no justification. Humans are different. Roquentin is conscious of the root. He can question it, describe it, be nauseated by it. He has consciousness, which means he is not simply there like the root. He exists for himself, at a distance from himself. But Roquentin also experiences his own contingency. He too exists without reason or necessity. He could not exist, and the universe would not care. His existence is as absurd as the roots, but he is aware of this absurdity. This awareness creates the nausea. To live normally, you must ignore existence, cover it over with meanings and purposes and routines. But once you see through these coverings, once you confront existence directly, nausea is inevitable. Roquentin abandons his biographical project. He realizes that historical narratives are ways of making existence seem necessary, of pretending that events had to happen the way they did. But this is false. History is as contingent as everything else. The aristocrat he was writing about, the Marquis de Rollebon, is just as absurd as anyone else. His life had no necessity. The historical importance attributed to him is a fiction. History tries to make sense of what has no sense. This connects to Sartre's later philosophy. We try to give our lives narrative structure, to make them into stories with meaning and purpose. But this is bad faith. Our existence has no inherent narrative. We are creating the narrative, not discovering it. Roquentin considers suicide. If existence is absurd and contingent, why continue existing? But he realizes that suicide would not resolve the absurdity. It would just be another contingent event, equally meaningless. He also considers other people as a solution. Perhaps relationships could provide meaning, could anchor existence in something beyond pure contingency. But his few attempts at connection fail. Other people are as contingent as he is. The novel includes a character called the self-taught man, a pathetic figure who is reading all the books in the library in alphabetical order. The self-taught man represents humanism, the belief that humanity gives meaning to existence. But Roquentin sees through this. Humanism is another way of covering over contingency, of pretending that human existence has special importance. But humans are as absurd as anything else. They too simply happen to exist. Near the end of the novel, Roquentin hears a jazz song in a cafe. The song moves him because it seems to escape contingency. The melody is necessary in a way that existence is not. Each note has to follow the previous note. The song has internal logic. He imagines the American woman who sang the song and the Jewish composer who wrote it. They created something that escapes contingency, something perfect and necessary. Perhaps art offers a solution. The novel ends ambiguously. Roquentin decides to leave Bouville and perhaps write a book, not a historical biography, but a work of art, a novel. Perhaps through creating something necessary, something that has to be the way it is, he can justify his existence. This ending suggests that creation might redeem contingency. By making something, you give your existence a purpose. The artist creates necessity out of contingency, creates meaning out of absurdity. But Sartre himself later criticized this solution. In his later philosophy, he emphasized that creation does not escape contingency. The artwork is as contingent as anything else. It just exists, having been created for no ultimate reason. Nausea works as literature in ways that philosophical treatises cannot. It does not argue for existentialist positions. It makes you feel them. The reader experiences something like Roquentin's nausea, the vertigo of confronting contingency. The novel influenced countless later writers. Camus' The Stranger explores similar themes. Beckett's novels and plays create worlds of absurdity and meaninglessness. The Nouveau Roman in France experimented with narrative structures that resist conventional meaning-making. But Nausea remains unique in its intensity and philosophical depth. It is not just a novel with philosophical themes. It is philosophy enacted through narrative, ideas made concrete in experience. The style contributes to this. The diary form creates intimacy and immediacy. You are inside Roquentin's consciousness as he experiences nausea. The writing is concrete and sensory, grounding abstract ideas in physical experience. Sartre's descriptions of objects are remarkable. The famous passage about the root goes on for pages, circling around the experience of confronting existence, trying to capture something that words cannot quite express. I saw the root of the chestnut tree kneaded into the earth just under my bench. I no longer remembered it was a root. Words had disappeared, and with them the significance of things, the way they are to be used, the feeble points of reference which men have traced on their surface. This is phenomenology as literature. Sartre describes how things appear when you strip away conventional meanings, when you confront them as pure existence. The description is precise and overwhelming. The novel also captures the experience of time. Roquentin experiences the present as thick and sticky, refusing to flow normally. Past and future lose their structure. He is stuck in an eternal present that has no narrative shape. This connects to Sartre's later philosophy of temporality. Consciousness creates time through its projects, through reaching toward the future and retaining the past. When projects collapse, when nothing matters, time becomes distorted. Nausea is also deeply lonely. Roquentin is isolated, unable to connect with others, unable to find meaning in relationships. This loneliness is not just personal. It reflects the existential isolation of consciousness. Each consciousness is alone, separated from others by the unbridgeable gap between subjectivities. You can never truly know another person's experience. You can never merge with them. Connection is always partial and contingent. The political implications are muted in Nausea. Sartre had not yet developed his theory of engagement. Roquentin is apolitical, indifferent to social issues. But the novel implicitly critiques bourgeois existence, the comfortable routine that hides absurdity. Later, Sartre would argue that confronting absurdity should lead to political engagement, to choosing commitment despite contingency. But Nausea stops before that choice. It shows the confrontation but not the response. The novel remains disturbing. It refuses to comfort. It does not suggest that everything will be okay or that meaning can be easily found. It insists on the absurdity of existence without softening that insistence. This is why nausea still matters. It captures something about human experience that philosophy alone cannot express. It makes contingency visceral, turns abstract ideas into lived experience, forces you to confront what you normally ignore. Reading Nausea is an initiation into existentialism. After reading it, you cannot look at ordinary objects quite the same way. The furniture, the trees, the people around you, all reveal themselves as existing without reason, simply there, absurd. This might seem like a path to despair, but Sartre did not intend it that way. Seeing through false meanings, confronting contingency, recognizing absurdity, these are the first steps toward authenticity. You cannot live honestly until you see what you are looking at. Nausea strips away illusions. It shows existence as it is, without the meanings we project onto it. This stripping away is painful, nauseating, but it is also liberating. Once you see through false necessities, you can choose authentic commitments. The novel ends with Roquentin leaving Bouville. He has given up his historical project, abandoned his routines, seen through his former life. What he will do next is uncertain, but he has at least stopped living in bad faith. This is the value of nausea. It breaks through conventional existence, forces confrontation with reality, makes continued self-deception difficult. It is a crisis that opens possibility, even if that possibility is terrifying. The Family Idiot, Understanding Flaubert. In his later years, Sartre turned to biography as a form of philosophy. His massive study of Gustave Flaubert, the family idiot, occupied him for over a decade. The work was left incomplete at 3 published volumes totaling over 2,000 pages. It represented a new approach to understanding human existence through the detailed analysis of a single life. Sartre chose Flaubert because Flaubert seemed on the surface to contradict existentialism. Flaubert claimed to hate freedom, to desire the passive existence of things. He said he wanted to be a stone. He seemed to represent the opposite of Sartre's philosophy of freedom and engagement. But Sartre's project was to show that even Flaubert, who seemed most determined by circumstances, was actually making choices. Even Flaubert's passive stance was a choice, a fundamental project that organized his life. No one is simply determined. Everyone is free, even when they use that freedom to deny freedom. The work combines biography, psychoanalysis, literary criticism, and philosophy. Sartre calls it existential psychoanalysis. The goal is to understand Flaubert's fundamental project, the basic choice that made him who he was. Sartre begins with Flaubert's childhood. Gustave was born into a bourgeois family in Rouen. His father was a successful surgeon, cold and distant. His mother was depressed and emotionally unavailable. His older brother Achille was the favored son, destined to follow his father into medicine. Gustave learned to read late. His mother taught him without enthusiasm, treating him as less intelligent than his brother. Sartre argues that this experience was formative. Gustave internalized the message that he was unloved, unwanted, less valuable than his brother. This was not a simple psychological trauma. It was a situation that Gustave had to respond to. How he responded would determine who he became. He could have rebelled, rejected his family's judgment, insisted on his own worth. Instead, he chose a different path. He chose passivity. He accepted his family's view of him as less worthy. He internalized their judgment and made it his own. He became the passive, unloved child that they saw him as. This was his fundamental choice. But this choice was not simple submission. It was also a kind of revenge. By being passive, by being the idiot, Gustave refused to participate in the bourgeois world his family represented. His passivity was a form of resistance. Sartre traces this fundamental choice through Flaubert's entire life. His teenage writings show a fascination with passive characters who suffer without acting. His early prose is about people overcome by forces beyond their control. His famous nervous attack at age 22, which ended his law studies, was not simply a medical event. It was a choice, an act of bad faith that allowed him to escape the career his father planned for him while denying responsibility for the escape. By becoming ill, Flaubert achieved passivity while claiming it was forced upon him. He could live as a writer without admitting he chose to be a writer. The illness was his strategy for having what he wanted while denying he wanted it. His literary work continued the pattern. Madame Bovary is about a woman who is passive, who acts through dreams and fantasies rather than genuine choice. Emma Bovary is what Flaubert made himself, someone who lives in imagination rather than engaging with reality. Flaubert's famous claim that Madame Bovary c'est moi was literally true. Emma was his self-portrait, his projection of his own fundamental project onto a female character. She embodies the passive stance he had chosen. His style also reflects this project. Flaubert spent years perfecting individual sentences, seeking the exact word, the perfect rhythm. This obsessive labor was another form of passivity disguised as activity. By focusing on style, Flaubert could avoid saying anything. The content of his work could remain neutral, impersonal, dead. Style became a way of writing without engaging, of producing words without commitment. Sartre's analysis is relentlessly detailed. He examines every aspect of Flaubert's life and work, showing how they express the fundamental choice of passivity. The detail is overwhelming, sometimes exhausting, but Sartre's point requires this comprehensiveness. He wants to show that a whole life can be understood as the expression of a single choice, that everything connects, that there is unity beneath apparent diversity. Flaubert's letters, his novels, his illnesses, his relationships, all express the same fundamental project. This project is what Sartre calls Flaubert's being for itself, his conscious existence. But it develops within facticity, within the given circumstances of his birth, his family, his historical moment. Freedom and facticity intertwine. Sartre also places Flaubert historically. He was born into the bourgeoisie at a particular moment after the French Revolution, when the bourgeoisie was consolidating power but felt guilty about it. This historical situation shaped what choices were available to him. Flaubert's hatred of the bourgeoisie was common among his generation of artists. They despised their own class but could not identify with the workers. They became the contemptuous children of the bourgeoisie, attacking it from within. This historical position allowed Flaubert's particular project. He could be passive, refusing bourgeois activity and engagement, while still living on bourgeois wealth. His art became a kind of aristocratic refusal of bourgeois values. Sartre never finished the work. He planned several more volumes but went blind before completing them. The published volumes end in 1857 with the publication of Madame Bovary. Flaubert's later years remain unanalyzed. But what exists is remarkable. It demonstrates Sartre's method of existential psychoanalysis applied comprehensively to a single life. It shows how freedom operates within determinism, how choice creates meaning within given circumstances. Critics pointed out problems. The work is too long, too detailed, sometimes more about Sartre's theories than about Flaubert. Sartre sometimes seems to be using Flaubert to work out his own philosophical positions. The claim that everything in a life can be traced to a single fundamental choice seems too simple. Lives are complex, contradictory, changing. Reducing everything to one choice may distort more than it reveals. But Sartre's ambition was admirable. He wanted to show that philosophy could illuminate individual existence, that abstract theories could be tested against concrete lives, that understanding a person required understanding their fundamental choices. The work also represents Sartre's engagement with Marxism. He analyzes Flaubert's class position, the economic basis of his ability to be a writer, the historical forces shaping his consciousness. But he refuses to reduce Flaubert to these forces. Flaubert was shaped by his class and his historical moment. But he was not determined by them. He responded to them through his choices. The response was his, even if the situation was given. This synthesis of existentialism and Marxism never fully succeeded. Sartre tried to combine individual freedom with social determinism, but the combination remained unstable. Freedom and determination kept pulling apart. The Family Idiot was Sartre's last major philosophical work. It appeared between 1971 and 1972 when he was in his 60s. He would live another 8 years, but would write no more philosophy of comparable scope. The work stands as a monument to Sartre's commitment to understanding human existence in all its complexity. He refused to settle for abstract generalizations. He wanted to show how freedom works in a particular life, shaped by particular circumstances. Whether he succeeded is debatable, but the attempt itself is significant. Sartre took seriously the challenge of explaining one human being completely, of showing how all the pieces fit together, of revealing the unity beneath diversity. Flaubert as subject is both appropriate and ironic. Appropriate because Flaubert represents the challenges to Sartre's philosophy, passivity, determinism, the refusal of engagement. Ironic because Sartre spent thousands of pages on a man who claimed to hate freedom and commitment. But perhaps this was Sartre's point. Even the man who denies freedom is exercising it through that denial. Even the most passive existence is actively chosen. Even Flaubert, who wanted to be a thing, remained inescapably conscious and free. The work remains largely unread today. Its length intimidates, its detail exhausts, its incompleteness frustrates. But for those willing to engage with it, The Family Idiot offers Sartre's most sustained attempt to understand a human life from the inside. It shows what existential biography might be, not just a catalog of external events, but an excavation of choices, meanings, projects. It tries to answer the question, what does it mean to be this particular person, making these particular choices in this particular situation? The question remains relevant even if Sartre's answer is incomplete. Understanding ourselves and others requires more than listing facts. It requires grasping the fundamental choices that organize a life, the basic projects that give it unity and meaning. Sartre spent his final productive years trying to understand Flaubert. In doing so, he was also trying to understand human existence itself, to show how freedom works within determination, how individuals create themselves within circumstances they did not choose. Sartre and feminism, the Simone connection. No discussion of Sartre's philosophy is complete without examining his relationship with Simone de Beauvoir and the complex intersection of his thought with feminist philosophy. Beauvoir was not simply Sartre's companion. She was a major philosopher in her own right, and her work both drew from and challenged Sartre's existentialism. They met in 1929 when both were students preparing for the aggregation examination. Sartre placed first, Beauvoir placed second. The examiners noted that Beauvoir was perhaps more knowledgeable but Sartre more original. This set the pattern. She had the deeper learning, he had the bolder ideas. They formed what they called a necessary love, a central relationship that would last their entire lives. They also allowed themselves contingent loves, secondary relationships with others. This arrangement was Sartre's idea initially, and Beauvoir agreed to it. The arrangement was not equal in practice. Sartre had many affairs. Beauvoir had fewer. Sartre sometimes treated his contingent lovers poorly, making promises he did not keep. Beauvoir was more careful, but also more wounded by the arrangement. Their letters, published after their deaths, reveal the complexity. They wrote to each other constantly when apart, sharing everything. But the letters also show Sartre discussing his other lovers in ways that must have hurt Beauvoir, even as she accepted the arrangement. Feminists later criticized both the arrangement and Beauvoir's acceptance of it. She subordinated herself to Sartre, they argued. She let him define the terms. She accepted an arrangement that gave him more freedom while limiting hers. Beauvoir herself later acknowledged some of this. She said women of her generation had been trained to defer to men, to find their meaning through relationships with male geniuses. She had internalized these values even while intellectually rejecting them. But Beauvoir was also a major thinker who developed existentialism in directions Sartre never explored. Her book, The Second Sex, published in 1949, applied existentialist concepts to the situation of women and created the philosophical foundation for modern feminism. The book begins with a question: what is a woman? Beauvoir answers that one is not born a woman, one becomes a woman. This echoes Sartre's claim that existence precedes essence. There is no eternal feminine nature. Femininity is constructed through choices and social conditioning. Women have been defined as the other, the inessential, the object. Men have claimed the position of subject, of consciousness, of freedom. Women have been relegated to immanence, while men claim transcendence. This is not natural or necessary. It is a historical arrangement created and maintained by men to preserve their dominance. Women have been turned into objects for men, defined by their bodies, restricted to passive roles. Beauvoir analyzes how this happens. Girls are taught to be passive, to focus on appearance, to prepare themselves for men. They are discouraged from transcendence, from projects, from freedom. They are trained to be women, not to be free human beings. This training is enforced through culture, through myths about feminine nature, through economic dependence, through social pressure. Women internalize these restrictions and police themselves. They choose femininity, but the choice is made within a system designed to limit their options. Marriage traditionally turned women into property. Motherhood defined them through their biological function. Romantic love became a trap where women lost themselves in devotion to men. All of these institutions limited women's freedom while claiming to fulfill their nature. Beauvoir's analysis drew directly from Sartre's concepts. Bad faith, the look, being for others, transcendence and immanence, all of these appear in The Second Sex. She applied Sartre's philosophy to women's concrete situation and revealed its power. But she also went beyond Sartre. She showed how existentialism, developed by men, had ignored half of humanity. Sartre's examples were almost always male. His philosophy of freedom did not account for how freedom is systematically denied to women. She analyzed the female body and reproduction in ways Sartre never considered. The experience of menstruation, pregnancy, childbirth, these shape women's lives, but were absent from male existentialist thought. Beauvoir brought them into philosophy. She also showed how women's situation created specific forms of bad faith. Women are taught to be passive objects for men while secretly believing they are free subjects. This double consciousness, this divided existence is imposed on women by their situation. The book was controversial when published. It was attacked from all sides. The Catholic Church condemned it. Communists criticized it for focusing on gender rather than class. Many men, including some of Sartre's friends, found it threatening. Sartre himself praised the book publicly and supported Beauvoir's work, but he did not fully integrate her insights into his own philosophy. He continued writing about freedom in abstract terms that ignored how gender shapes freedom's exercise. Their relationship remained intellectually collaborative. They read each other's work, discussed ideas constantly, influenced each other's thinking. But there was asymmetry. Sartre was the famous philosopher. Beauvoir was often seen as his disciple. She resisted this characterization. She insisted on her independence, her own ideas, her own contributions. But the world often saw her as secondary, derivative, less original than Sartre. Recent feminist scholarship has reversed this judgment. Many now argue that Beauvoir's philosophy was more concrete, more connected to actual experience, more politically effective than Sartre's abstract theorizing. The second sex founded modern feminism. It gave the women's movement philosophical grounding. It showed that women's oppression was not natural but constructed, not eternal but historical, not necessary but chosen by a patriarchal society. Sartre's philosophy influenced this, but Beauvoir transformed it. She made existentialism politically relevant in ways Sartre's more abstract work did not. She showed what engagement meant in practice, not just in theory. She also lived more authentically in some ways. While Sartre made compromises with communism that betrayed his principles, Beauvoir maintained clearer positions. She supported women's rights, abortion rights, anti-colonial struggles without the equivocations that sometimes marked Sartre's positions. Her novels also explored existentialist themes. She Came to Stay dealt with the triangle of consciousnesses and the conflict between freedoms. The Mandarins portrayed post-war intellectual life and the political dilemmas facing engaged intellectuals. These novels were more accessible than Sartre's philosophical prose. They reached wider audiences and communicated existentialist ideas through story and character rather than abstract argument. The relationship between Sartre and Beauvoir became a model for some and a warning for others. They maintained intellectual partnership for 50 years. They never married, never lived together, never had children. They created their own form of relationship. But the arrangement came at costs, particularly for Beauvoir. She sometimes subordinated her work to his, delayed her projects to support his. She accepted an arrangement that gave him more freedom than it gave her. Feminists debated whether she should have accepted this. Some saw her as complicit in her own subordination. Others saw her as making the best choices available to a woman in her historical situation. Beauvoir herself was ambivalent. She valued the relationship and refused to condemn it. But she also acknowledged that younger women might choose differently, might demand more equality, might refuse the compromises she accepted. Her influence on feminism far exceeded Sartre's influence. The second sex inspired generations of feminists. Beauvoir's analysis of women's situation, her insistence that gender is constructed, her vision of women's liberation, these became foundational to feminist thought. Sartre's contribution to feminism was indirect. His philosophy provided concepts that Beauvoir adapted. His support gave her work legitimacy, but he did not himself develop a feminist philosophy. Later feminists criticized Sartre's philosophy as masculinist. His emphasis on radical freedom ignored how social structures constrain women. His abstraction from the body ignored how women's bodies are politicized. His individualism ignored how women are defined relationally. These criticisms have merit. Sartre's philosophy, despite its radical claims, remained limited by his male perspective. He did not see what Beauvoir saw, did not experience what women experience, did not fully grasp how freedom is gendered. But Beauvoir's appropriation of his concepts showed their potential. Existentialism could be feminist if applied to women's concrete situation. Freedom, choice, transcendence, these ideas empowered women once directed at their actual circumstances. The relationship between Sartre and Beauvoir thus shows both the power and limits of his philosophy. The power, concepts that could analyze oppression and envision liberation. The limits, a male perspective that missed half of human experience. Beauvoir filled those gaps. She made existentialism feminist. She showed that women's liberation required both existential recognition of freedom and political transformation of structures that denied freedom. Sartre acknowledged her contribution but never fully incorporated it. His later work remained focused on class and colonialism. Gender appeared peripherally, if at all. This was a failure to learn from the woman who shared his intellectual life. Their story is complex. Not simply a great man and his devoted companion, not simply a feminist pioneer subordinated to patriarchy. Both things at once: intellectual partnership and unequal power, mutual influence and gendered hierarchy. Understanding Sartre requires understanding Beauvoir. She was not a footnote to his philosophy. She was a major thinker who took his ideas, transformed them, and created something new. Feminism owes more to her than to him, though both contributed. The Simone connection thus complicates any simple assessment of Sartre. His philosophy enabled feminist thought through Beauvoir's work, but his personal practice and theoretical limitations showed how even radical philosophy can remain limited by the perspectives and privileges of its creators. Legacy: how Sartre changed how we think. Jean-Paul Sartre died in 1980, but his influence persists in ways both obvious and subtle. He changed how we think about freedom, responsibility, authenticity, and engagement. His ideas seeped into culture beyond philosophy, shaping literature, politics, psychology, and everyday self-understanding. The most direct legacy is in philosophy itself. Sartre revitalized existentialism, transforming it from a marginal movement into a major force. After Sartre, philosophers could not ignore questions of existence, freedom, and authenticity. These became central philosophical problems. Phenomenology in France developed partly through engagement with Sartre. Merleau-Ponty, his friend and later critic, worked out his own phenomenology in dialogue with Sartre's ideas. Their agreement and disagreement shaped French philosophy for decades. Post-structuralism emerged partly in reaction against Sartre. Foucault, Derrida, and others rejected his emphasis on the autonomous subject and radical freedom. But they defined themselves against him, which showed his importance. You had to deal with Sartre even to reject him. Feminist philosophy, as discussed, drew heavily from Beauvoir's adaptation of Sartrean concepts. The idea that gender is constructed, not natural, comes directly from existentialist principles. Generations of feminist thought developed from this foundation. Political philosophy was transformed by Sartre's insistence on engagement. The idea that intellectuals must take positions, that neutrality is impossible, that thinking requires acting, these became widely accepted, at least on the left. The new left of the 1960s was deeply influenced by Sartrean ideas. Student movements, anti-war activists, anti-colonial struggles, many drew inspiration from Sartre's combination of Marxism and existentialism, his emphasis on freedom and commitment. In literature, existentialist themes became ubiquitous. The alienated protagonist, the search for meaning in an absurd world, the confrontation with freedom and responsibility. These motifs appeared in countless novels, plays, and films after Sartre. Theater was particularly influenced. Sartre's plays showed that drama could address philosophical questions directly while remaining dramatically powerful. Beckett, Ionesco, Pinter, and many others created works exploring existential themes. Film noir adopted existentialist aesthetics and themes. The isolated protagonist in a meaningless world, making choices with unclear consequences, confronting moral ambiguity, this became a staple of noir and influenced cinema broadly. Popular culture absorbed existentialism in diluted forms. The rebel without a cause, the individual standing against society, the person defining themselves through their choices. These became cultural archetypes influenced by existentialist ideas. Psychology and psychotherapy were deeply affected. Existential psychology emerged as a distinct approach, emphasizing freedom, responsibility, and meaning rather than drives or conditioning. Therapists like Rollo May and Viktor Frankl developed therapeutic approaches based partly on existentialist principles. The idea that you create your own meaning, that you are responsible for your choices, that authenticity requires confronting your freedom, these became common in therapeutic contexts, though often simplified or distorted. The human potential movement of the 1970s absorbed existentialist ideas in popularized form. The emphasis on choice, self-creation, living authentically became self-help commonplaces. Sartre would have rejected much of this as apolitical and individualistic, but his influence was there. Even business culture adopted existentialist language. Corporate training speaks of authenticity, engagement, taking ownership. These words come from existentialism, though used in ways Sartre would have found absurd or appalling. Political activism continues to reference Sartrean ideas. The slogan "No justice, no peace" echoes his insistence that silence is complicity. The demand that people take positions, that they cannot remain neutral, this comes from Sartre's theory of engagement. The concept of bad faith entered common vocabulary. People speak of self-deception, of lying to themselves, of denying their freedom in ways directly influenced by Sartre. The language became widespread even among those who never read him. His political legacy is mixed. Sartre's support for various revolutionary movements inspired some and disappointed others. His willingness to excuse Soviet crimes damaged his credibility. But his anti-colonialism, his opposition to racism, his support for liberation struggles left positive marks. The Algerian independence movement benefited from Sartre's support. He risked prosecution, faced death threats, used his fame to oppose French colonialism. This engagement mattered practically, not just theoretically. His influence on anti-apartheid movements, on American civil rights, on Third World liberation struggles was significant. Frantz Fanon, who wrote the preface to The Wretched of the Earth, drew heavily from Sartre while also criticizing his limitations. The idea that oppression must be resisted, that violence against oppressors can be justified, that intellectuals should support liberation movements. These Sartrean positions shaped revolutionary thought worldwide for better and worse. In academic philosophy, Sartre's influence waned after his death. Analytic philosophy, dominant in the English-speaking world, largely ignored him. Continental philosophy moved beyond existentialism to post-structuralism and other movements. But interest has revived recently. Scholars examine Sartre's phenomenology, his ontology, his ethics with fresh eyes. His work on imagination, emotion, and temporality receives renewed attention. His political philosophy is reconsidered. Being and Nothingness remains a major philosophical text, required reading in phenomenology and existentialism courses. Its influence on later philosophy, even among those who reject its conclusions, cannot be denied. His literary work endures. Nausea remains in print, still disturbing readers with its portrait of existence. His plays are still performed. His essays are still read, though less widely than in his lifetime. The personal example also matters. Sartre lived according to his principles, as best he could. He refused honors, supported unpopular causes, risked his safety for his beliefs. He showed what engaged philosophy might look like in practice. He made mistakes, serious ones. His apologetics for Soviet communism, his support for Maoist violence, his sometimes cruel treatment of lovers, these mar his legacy. He was not a saint, and his philosophy did not prevent significant moral failures. But he wrestled honestly with his time's central questions. How should one live under occupation? How should intellectuals respond to oppression? How can individual freedom and social justice be reconciled? He did not always answer correctly, but he asked the right questions. His conception of freedom remains provocative. The claim that we are condemned to be free, that we have no excuses, that we create ourselves through our choices, this challenges comfortable determinisms of all kinds. Whether you accept radical freedom or not, engaging with Sartre's argument clarifies your own position. You must either defend determinism against his critique or accept greater responsibility than most people want. His analysis of bad faith remains valuable. The ways people deceive themselves, deny their freedom, hide behind false necessities, these patterns persist. Sartre's phenomenology of self-deception illuminates contemporary life as much as mid-20th century Paris. The concept of authenticity, though problematic, addresses real questions. How do you live honestly in a world of social pressure and conformity? How do you take responsibility for your choices? How do you create meaning without self-deception? Sartre's answer, acknowledge your freedom, accept your responsibility, commit to chosen projects, may not satisfy everyone. But the question remains urgent. In an age of algorithms and social media, of manufactured consent and constant surveillance, authenticity seems both more difficult and more necessary. His insistence that intellectuals must engage, that thought requires action, that neutrality is impossible, this challenges academic insularity. Scholars may disagree about what engagement means, but Sartre forces them to consider the question. The legacy is not a set of doctrines to be followed, but a way of questioning. Sartre taught generations to interrogate apparent necessities, to recognize freedom in constraint, to take responsibility for choices. He showed that philosophy could address life as it is lived, that abstract concepts could illuminate concrete experience, that thinking and acting were inseparable. This remains his most important contribution. Whether existentialism as a movement is dead is debatable. The name has fallen out of fashion. Few philosophers today call themselves existentialists, but the questions Sartre raised persist, and his way of addressing them continues to influence those who grapple with freedom, meaning, and responsibility. In the end, Sartre changed how we think about being human. After Sartre, we cannot quite believe in fixed human nature. We cannot quite escape responsibility by claiming we had no choice. We cannot quite ignore our freedom even when we desperately want to. This is uncomfortable knowledge. It strips away comforting fictions. It demands more than most people want to give. But it is honest, and it respects human dignity by refusing to treat people as things determined by forces beyond their control. Sartre's legacy is this discomfort, this demand, this respect. He insisted on human freedom in an age of totalitarianism and determinism. He refused easy answers in favor of hard questions. He lived and thought with intensity, making mistakes but never retreating into safe conventionality. The world after Sartre cannot return to innocence about freedom and responsibility. We know too much. We cannot unknow that we are creating ourselves, that our choices matter, that we have no ultimate excuses. This knowledge is Sartre's gift and burden to us.